Jon. The wolf pups were amazing, so small, so tiny, and yet fully alert and active. He watched as they suckled from their exhausted mother. Farland had taken a quick look at the mother and said she seemed to be doing fine. She just needed rest and would need even more food and water, all of which Jon would ensure she got. The 5 wolves, 3 male and 2 female, were all gray with varying shades of yellow eyes, except for one which was dark black with green eyes. Ghost stood by ready to nudge any errant pup towards its mother's teat, and as Jon watched the mother drift off to sleep, he was joined by Loras, who had clearly been woken by the howls. They stood quietly for a few moments until Jon heard footsteps and turned to see Walder approaching. "Walder, how is she?" "She's passed, Jon," Walder replied tearfully. "I'm so sorry," Jon said, and found himself enveloped in what could have easily been a bone-crushing hug, should the man ever choose to do so. "I'm sorry," Lord said as he too got hugged. She was happy, Jon. At the end, she was happy," Walder said before looking at the pups. "The wolves have returned. She always said they would," he said with a nod. "We should go find Maester Luwin, have him inform people and take care of things." Walder nodded, and after making sure Ghost also had enough food, they locked the door and walked off towards the Maester's tower. Luwin was thankfully still awake, though he looked disturbed for some reason. But once they informed him, he told them to try and get some rest, and he would take care of things. Jon asked Walder if he wished them to stay with him for the night, but he said he was going to pray, and despite offering to join him, it was clear he wished to be alone. After bidding Loras good night, Jon walked to his room and unlocked it before locking it behind him. He undressed and took both eggs from their hiding place. The one Nain had led him to was different. The feelings he got from it were much harder to explain. Where with his own egg he felt a sense of home and family. With the other it felt foreign to him. He felt the life beneath his fingers. But he felt no connection. There was no call, and he wondered if he'd have to go through the same circumstances with it. He lay down in the bed, both eggs wrapped up tight, and hoped he'd dream of Rhaenys tonight. He needed to speak to her, to talk to her. Unfortunately, it was not to be, and he slept a dreamless sleep. Waking up the next morning, he washed, placed the eggs back, and left the room. He seemed to be the first awake, and so he headed to make sure the wolves were all right, knowing that Jaime would rise soon. Crossing the yard, he saw his uncle come out from the crypts, and thought about calling him, but he seemed distracted somewhat, so he continued on his way. "Thought I'd find you here," he heard Jaime's voice sometime later. How long it had been, he had no idea. "I just wanted to check, make sure they're all right. Your master came to see me last night," Jaime said. "Luwin, why?" "He told me about the old woman's passing." "Nain, was it?" "Aye. How are you feeling?" "I'm all right, my lord. Come, let's spar," Jon said, and Jaime nodded. The spar was longer than normal. It must have been well over an hour when Jaime hit the 5th point. Jon hadn't managed any this morning, but he had parried more, and he felt he'd made Jaime work a little harder. Something that seemed more than likely given Jaime's swallowing of their water supply. Jon couldn't resist a chuckle as he watched Jaime shake his head when he realized there was none left. "Thirsty, my lord," he japed. "Aye, how are you not?" "Unlike you, I drank when I woke, my lord," Jon said. And Jaime smirked. "You know far too much about me." "Really? I think you know far too much about me," Jon said, and both of them laughed. "Come, Jon, let's break our fast." By the time they entered the Great Hall, most people were up. Lady Stark sat at the table with Lord Wyman, Lord Galbart and his brother and brother's wife, while at the other table, Jon's cousins sat with Loras and the Manderley girls. Robb was sitting beside Bran, and Jon didn't know what to make of him. His brother had been punished and had come to join them at the feast, but they'd yet to speak to each other. The Aemon, he didn't have to turn around to know, was at another table, glowering at him, as he had been ever since he had been punished. Walking to the table, Jon sat down beside Loras, and a moment later they were joined by Jozin and Mira. "What was that noise last night? Are the wolves all right?" Arya said, even before he had a chance to take a bite of his food. He looked to his cousin, who was sitting there with egg dripping on her hand, and he chuckled. "Aye, they're fine, little wolf, though you're not the only little wolf anymore," Jon said. "What?" "Ghost has brothers and sisters now," Jon said, and had to reach out to restrain her as she tried to jump up from the table. "I want to see them. Can I have one? You're giving me one, aren't you?" "I mean, you gave me my bow. You have to give me a wolf now, too," Arya said, and the whole table broke into laughter. "Guzio, that's not how it works, but something else happened last night," Jon said sadly. "What is everything all right, Jon?" Sansa asked. I don't know if I should tell you this. I thought Lord Stark would be here. Father didn't come down to break his fast for some reason. Perhaps he's busy, Robb said, and both he and Loras looked at him a little shocked. He was speaking to them. Perhaps, I don't know how to tell you, but last night, old man she passed, Jon said, and immediately jumped up when he saw Sansa get upset. Sweetling, what's wrong? Lady Stark said before Jon could reach her. It's Nan-mother she passed last night, Sansa said, and Jon took a seat beside her and put his arm around her as she began to cry. Lady Stark got up from her seat and walked to the table, and as she got there, Jon whispered in Sansa's ear that he'd talk to her later and moved so her mother could comfort her. Word quickly spread around the hall and then beyond, and while they finished breaking their fasts, a lot of people's hearts didn't seem to be in it. Jon left the hall, and with Loras, Mira, Josian, Arya, and the Manderleys headed back to check on the wolves as they were leaving. Robb followed and looked to Jon, who nodded. Once they reached the tower, Jon told them not to try and go inside. The wolves would be very protective of the young, and while he knew Ghost wouldn't, and so far the mother hadn't snapped at anyone, he couldn't be sure they'd be safe. He opened the door and Ghost looked at him before rushing out and racing off. His wolf obviously had his own plans. No sooner had he gone than one of the female pups tried to leave. Oh, this one, I'll take this one, Arya said, moving towards it. Arya, wait, Jon said, jumping in front of her. She needs her mother, Arya. She's too young, he said, to a pouting girl. But when she's older, I can have her then, right? I don't know, Arya, it's up to her mother, he said, and almost fell over when Arya stepped around him to talk to the mother wolf. Please, can I have her? I'll be ever so good, and I'll look after her. I swear it on the old gods and the blue. I think that's supposed to be new, Lorziera said, with a laugh, which he stopped, as soon as she glared at him. Jon just looked on as the wolf mother looked to him and then Arya before he swore as she nodded. He wasn't the only one who thought so, given the large smile that suddenly appeared on Arya's face. See, all you have to do is ask, Arya said, giggling. Jon knelt down and checked on the mother. Looking in her eyes, he tried once again to open the door. This time she allowed him in some, though it was clear it was only to be briefly, around him. Loras distracted the Manderleys when he saw what Jon was doing, and Jardine and Mira spoke to Robb and Arya. The wolf thanked him for looking after her and her young. She was tired, but she had plenty of food and water, and she was comfortable. As he stepped back up, they were joined by Sansa, who almost cooed at the wolf pups. Jon looked to the mother, who gave him permission, and he picked up the other female pup. Holding it carefully in his hands, he allowed Sansa and then the others to touch her, before he placed it back close to its mother. Closing over the door and looking to the two Stark guards who were nearby, he nodded and they began walking back to the keep. He saw Ser Wallace and Lord Wyman talking to the Glover lords, all of them watching them as they walked by. Mira. Seeing Jon with the wolves was something she'd never have believed had she not been there. How the mother wolf allowed him to hold her pup, how she seemed to trust him so completely was something unknown to her. Words he had heard of, there were some in the neck, but what Jon did was different. Josian had explained how he'd taken control of several ravens at once, how he'd warged into a raven as far away as Dragonstone. While she knew her brother was being truthful, a part of her didn't believe it until now. Josian himself had been changed by just being around Jon. For that alone, he'd have her support, but he had trusted them enough to tell them the truth, and ever since she had watched him carefully. Her father, her brother, and now she, all would be there for him in any way. They could going forward. For now, though, she had another agenda. Something she had wanted ever since she had beat his friend in White Harbor. She wished for a spar. So, Jon, will you be sparring with me today, then? She asked, and Arya looked on excitedly. Let me see, Loras, can you quickly think up an excuse so I can run away from Mira's spear? Jon said, and Loras chuckled. No, I'm afraid not. Besides, I'm sure all these ladies would love to see you knocked on your arse, wouldn't you, ladies? Really? And I thought you were my friend, Jon said, feigning being hurt. As they entered the sparring yard, she felt her heart race. She looked around and quickly got her spear, watching on as Jon looked at the tourney swords before shaking his head. Give me a moment, he said, racing off towards his rooms. Is Jon really running away? Iris said to laughs. I think he's gone for his sword, Loras said. His sword? Robb asked. Aye, his tourney sword. He has one he prefers. They waited for a few more moments until Jon came running back, a small thin sword in his hand. Arzier ran to him to look at it, and as he handed it to her, she could hear them laugh as they walked towards her. It's so skinny, Arzier said, looking intently at the sword. So are you, little wolf? Jon said, mussing her hair before walking back over to take a tawny knife from the rack of blunted weapons. My lady, shall we? Jon said, an ear grimaced before getting a smirk on her face. He'd pay for that. Of course, sir. They stood a few feet apart, Jon holding the sword much differently than she'd seen him before. She looked around to see far more people lined up around than she'd hoped. Feeling her nerves get the better of her, she looked at Jon, who just smiled reassuringly at her. So she twirled her spear and got ready. The first thrust just barely missed his head. The second forced him backwards. She swung the spear low, trying to take his feet from under him, but he surprised her by jumping over it. She backed away as Jon swung his sword swiftly, left and then right, forcing her to parry and back away some more. She thrust her spear once more and he blocked it with his sword. Then he began to move even more quickly, his sword strikes faster and faster. She was barely able to block them, and only her extra reach kept him from getting a hit against her. She swung the spear in a high arc from the right, aiming at neck height. Jon ducked and she stopped the swing, and lowered the spear coming back low from the left, which he jumped over. He landed a little awkwardly, and so she swung again, high, low, and high again. Though he avoided the blows, it was clear he was moving less comfortably. She smirked. It was only a matter of time now. She thrust twice quickly, moved her spear to swing, and then it was over. She never even saw it coming. As she swung her spear, he deflected it with his sword, but he followed through, pinning the spear to the ground before spinning. By the time she brought her spear back around, he held the knife to her neck. His sword was positioned to block any swing, and he had come so fast and so completely inside her defenses that she had no choice. I yield, she said, and he nodded. Well fought, he said, smiling at her, and she smiled back. There was no arrogance, no attempt to put her down. He meant it, and she could tell she had given him a tough fight. That was, can I have a spear? Can you teach me? Aized and Mira laughed. She looked around the yard to see almost everyone had stopped what they were doing to watch. Lord Jaime was speaking to Lord Wyman, Sir Wylis, and the Glovers. Winterfell and Wyla were asking Jon if he was all right, while Sansa was handing him some water. Lord Robb and Lord Loras were speaking in hushed voices, while making some of the fighting actions she and Jon had just done. Jojen walked over to her, a proud look on his face. He carried a mug filled with water, which she drank quickly. You were incredible, sister. I don't think anyone's given Jon such a fight. He won, she said. Aye, but he needed to work for it. You saw what he did to Robb and Theon. Look around you, sister. They expected Jon to have won, but look how they're looking at you. She did as he said and took a look around. He was right. People were looking at her a little differently. Loras already respected her, and she knew Jon did too, but Lord Robb was looking at her like she was the warrior reborn. Aridia was moving around, mimicking her spear moves, while though the girls were helping Jon, all of them smiled at her, even Lady Sansa. They had few more spars that day. Jon, though, didn't take part. She had been right when he jumped. He'd twisted his ankle and had gone off to see the Maester. Lord Robb asked for some pointers, which both she and Loras gave him. Though she could tell it was his brother, he wished them for most. After finishing the spars, they were informed that there would be a service for Old Nan later. The surprising thing was it was to be a pyre and not a burial, and would take place in the yard nearest the Godswood. Luzier. They would have their meal after the service for the old woman. He had found Jon talking to the giant who it turned out was her great-grandson, though he called her grandmother, which had Loras thinking on his own. He really needed to send her a raven, or letter. He'd been remiss, and he knew she'd bring it up when next they met, which would not be as distant as it may have been. Lord Jaime had said the wedding in Casterly Rock would be a larger one, and he knew his family would attend. Jon limped some as they headed to the yard. He had only hurt his ankle slightly, and not sprained or twisted it, but still it would be a few days before he sparred again. Something his brother would not be happy about. After they had watched the spar with Mira and Loras had cursed himself for not thinking of bringing a dagger to his own, Jon's brother had spoken glowingly about him. Loras wasn't sure what to think about Robb. He seemed to be genuinely contrite, though he was being so to the wrong person. It was Jon who Loras would take his lead from, and so, as arrived at the pyre, he watched as Jon's family made room for them both, and as Walder moved to stand beside Lord Stark. It seemed the old woman was much beloved among those in Winterfell. As the yard was full of people, young, old, it made no difference, and Loras was not surprised to see some weeping as Lord Stark began to speak. I knew Nainal all of my life, as most did here. She was there when I was born, when most of my children were born. Walder here, her grandson, told me her last wishes were to be laid to rest on a pyre and for my son Jon to say some words over her, so I shall leave it to him to best remember her how she would have liked. Lord Stark said to some gasps and hushed whispers, Loras watched as Jon stepped forward. He looked to see Walder bend down and whisper something in his ear, and when he nodded, the whispers quietened down. Nan used to tell us stories. Me, Rob, no doubt Sansa, Arya, and Bran too. I'm sure at some point she told everyone of those who grew up in Winterfell. Those very same stories. Stories of giants and wolves, of Bran the Builder and the children of the forest, tales which made us laugh, made us cry, scared us, and made us feel warm. They were all of them told, and we listened eagerly. She told us tales of the old ways, of how things were, and how those who came before us were just like each of us, just the same. People who were trying their best. She would always be there to make sure we were feeling well, to make sure we never forgot that we are only here because of those who came before us. I used to wonder why she would tell us those tales, why she would go out of her way to make sure we knew of the Long Night or the Last Hero, why we must know of the Night King or the Rat Cook. Had you asked me yesterday, I wouldn't have known what to say, wouldn't have been able to answer, but today I know. She told us because we must always remember those who came before us. We must hold them deep in our hearts and never let them go. They must never be just stories that were told long ago and forgotten. They have to be more than that. They have to be remembered. Nan has to be remembered. Jon said. Aye. Loras heard being said loudly. Aye. The noise even louder now. So we will forever remember Nan. We will forever remember all those who came before us. The North remembers, Jon said. The North remembers reverberated loudly around the yard as Walder stepped forward with a flaming torch. As he lit the pyre, the wolf's howl was heard loudly through Winterfell. Jaime! After the funeral, things had gone relatively well, though Stark was behaving oddly. His wife had for some reason decided against trying to stop Jon sitting where he should. And Jon had, apart from spending time with the wolves, spent a lot of time with the giant Walder. Today, Jon had come to speak to him about the man, and Jaime was stunned by some of the revelations. He was glad Loras had been present, or perhaps he may not have believed at all. You're saying that he's Duncan the Tall's great-grandson and that the old woman was daughter to a king? Aye, one of the great bastards, my lord. I don't understand how. Why would she be here? She said she was waiting, my lord, for me. Why? To give me this, Jon said, taking out another dragon egg. This one with deep bronze scales. Jaime looked at the egg and shook his head. Reaching out, he knew what he'd feel even before his hand touched the thing, and he was not disappointed, as he felt the life move inside it. What Jon said next, though, took him even more by surprise, Loras too, though he was still coming to terms with the dragon egg. I made her a promise. I'd take Walder with us when we left. Make him a Kingsguard, Jon said. Jon, you can't just make someone a Kingsguard without thinking about it. Can he even wield a sword? Does he even want to? He was born to it. I know how strange it sounds, my lord. I understand, but I believe it's what I'm supposed to do. What do you mean, Jon? Loras asked. It's the dreams, the visions, coming here now. All of it. It's what I was supposed to do. I can't explain it. Nan said it was my destiny that some things were out of our control. So I don't know, gods, fate, whatever, but I think she was right. Fine, I'll check Walder out. Me, Jon, not you. If I'm satisfied we can go and get him better trained, he'll need to be knighted too, gods. I can only imagine what Arthur and Barristan will think. Thank you, my lord, Jon said, smiling. Over the next couple of days he met with Walder, and while the man was clearly untrained, there was something there, and for simple brute strength he doubted even the mountain would beat him easily. Today, though he cared not a jot about Walder or the Kingsguard, he had woken up to be greeted with the news he'd waited for almost a moon to hear. Daisy and her family would be arriving later that day. As he broke his fast, he actually enjoyed the japes both Jon and Loras made at his expense. He found he cared not so excited was he to finally see her again, though given how people spoke of her mother, he was nervous too. Lady Magiet, it seemed, embodied everything there was about her sigil, a fear she bare, if ever there was one. After seeing Daisy and her sisters, Jaime could only begin to imagine the woman who birthed them. It'll be all right, my lord. We'll protect you. Chernjopet, and Loras shook his head. I think he may be on his own. Jon, we're not ready to face the she-bears yet, Loras said with a smirk. My brave squires, Jaime said, rolling his eyes to laughter from the girls at the table. After Jon, Loras, and the girls checked the wolves, they were informed the banners had been seen, and so Jaime's squires, the Starks, and everyone else lined up to welcome the arrival. The first through the gates were not the Mormonts, though, but the Karstarks. He recognized Eddard and Torrhen and a large man who must be their father, but not the small, slight girl with them. Following them was the Umbers, and he was glad to see the Great Chen had managed to come, his son beside him along with one of his daughters. He smiled broadly, then, when he saw the banner bearing the black bear on green leading the way was a short, stout woman, and following her, a woman who looked almost like a younger version of her. He saw Jari and Lyra, and then he saw her. Daisy rode in, holding a small girl in front of her, and she looked around before their eyes met. The smile she greeted him with made the wait worthwhile, and he watched on as everyone dismounted. The introductions took a long time. Lord Karstark was gruff, yet friendly, while the Great Jon greeted him like a long-lost friend, much to Ned Stark's surprise. Jon too was greeted fondly, though even Lord Karstark was friendlier with him. Finally, the Mormonts greeted Lord and Lady Stark, and Jaime noticed how brusquely Maege greeted the lady, though her greeting with Stark himself was far more welcoming. "My lord, I thank you for this honor you've done my house and my daughter," Maege said. "The honor is mine own, Maggie. It's good to see you." "Aye, you too, my lord." Jaime took a breath as she moved towards him. She looked him up and down, her face expressionless before she turned to look at her daughters. "My lady," Jaime said. "You're far prettier than any of my daughters, Lord Jaime, but I welcome you to my family." Maege said to a chuckle from Jon and Loras beside him. He turned and glowered at them before winking. "I'm honored, my lady." "None of that. Call me Maggie," the woman said with a twinkle in her eye before moving to stand in front of Jon. Jaime looked on as Maggie looked Jon up and down carefully before nodding. "I want to thank you, young man, for all you've done, both for my family here and at the Wall," Maggot said. "It was my honor, my lady," Jon said, and she smiled broadly at him before moving to greet the Reed children warmly. After he greeted Maegs' other daughter, who was called Alysanne, and said his hellos to Jori and Lyra, Daisy and the little girl moved to him. "My lord, it's good to see you well," Daisy said as Jaime took her hand. "You too, my lady," he said as he kissed it. "My sister Lyanna," Daisy said, and Jaime noticed both Ned and Jon's heads turn to look at the little girl. "Lady Lyanna, a pleasure," he said to the girl, who looked at him sullenly. "He talks funny," Lyanna said before moving to Jon. "Where's your wolf?" Daisy laughed, and once again Jaime caught his breath. He watched on as Lord and Lady Stark had servants show them to their rooms, and found himself torn between following Daisy and propriety, something his betrothed didn't seem to have the same problem with. "My lord, could you show me to my room?" she said, holding her arm out and winking suggestively. "It would be a pleasure, my lady." He led her after the others and saw her little sister head off with Jon, no doubt. Just like Daisy, she didn't take later for an answer. When they reached the keep, her mother and sisters were shown to their rooms, and Jaime asked a servant which were hers. Leading her to the room, he helped her bring her things in, while other servants brought in 2 large chests. Once they'd placed them down and left, he found himself in her arms. The kiss was hungry and deep, and how long it lasted he couldn't tell. When they eventually broke from it, both of them were breathless. "I missed you," both of them said together before laughing. "How did your mother take the news?" he asked, as he led her to the bed. "She was furious, demanded we stop this folly at once, refused her permission for us to marry," Daisy said before laughing at his shocked face. "Oh, that was way too easy," she said, and he grabbed her, kissing her again. "It's not nice to mess with your future husband," he said, kissing her neck. "But that's what makes it fun," she said as she yawned before pouting. As he got up from the bed, "Well, you're not the only one who likes to have fun," he said, smirking as he walked to the door and opened it, stepping out into the corridor. He ducked the pillow she threw at him and smiled as he walked down towards his own room. There was nothing he wanted more than to stay in the room and ravish her there and then, but he could tell she was tired. They had plenty of time to get reacquainted, and it wouldn't do for them to be found together alone in her room just yet. After all, the wedding was mere days away. Sansa, having so many important guests staying at Winterfell was exciting. Having them stay because they were coming to a wedding was a dream come true for her. She had finished her presents for Jaime and Daisy and had put the finishing touches to the ones for Jon and Loras, so as she sat in her sewing room, she found herself at a loss for what to do. Having Winifred with her had been something she had really enjoyed. The older girl liked a lot of the same things as Sansa did and had been impressed with her drawing. She also knew Jon and Loras and spoke fondly of them both, especially her brother and how well he danced, something which Sansa was unaware of. Alysir's Karstark, too, was proving to be someone who Sansa enjoyed spending time with also, and she wished that both ladies would be staying for longer than the wedding. Wella was like Arya and far different than her sister, though she too enjoyed embroidery, she just didn't seem to take it seriously. "This is incredible, Lady Sansa," Willa said, looking at the picture Jon had drawn of her. "Isn't it that Jon did that for me?" "He did, Win?" Winifred asked. "Not long after he arrived, it was he who taught me how to draw." "Do you think if I asked he'd draw me?" Addis asked. "I'm sure he would. We should ask for pictures of all of us. I'd love to see what I'd look like with different color hair," Wesley said. Sansa just nodded, and since they had nothing else to do, the girls left the room to go in search of her brother before they had yet another dinner to go to. While not fully fledged feasts, the meals they'd had since the guests arrived had been more and more extravagant, mainly because of the number of guests seated at them. Thankfully, after the first one, when Lord Wyman had arrived, her mother had not tried to sit Jon away from them anymore. As they made their way to the Broken Tower, knowing that was where Jon and the others would be, she smiled at the memory of the one the night Lady Dacey arrived. It had been more loud than usual, and she had heard comments that had come from the table where the Umber sat. Remembering what she had heard, it was the reaction of the small Jon, when he heard there were more wolves, which was the reason for her current smile. "What do you mean there are more? How many more?" "6. There can't be 6. Are they white like that one? Do they make noises? Thank the gods." It had taken Jon and Loras to explain to her Ghost's fascination with the small Jon, and she swore after that every time she looked to the man he would check over his shoulder periodically. As they reached the Broken Tower, she wasn't surprised at the group who were there. Jon Loras, along with both the Reeds, Arya and Lyanna Mormont, who were thick as thieves ever since the young girl's arrival. Lyanna Umber stood towering over Jon Reed, and she was glad to see both of them seem to get along. Also, there was her brother Robb, who it seemed spent more time in their company now, something she was pleased about. "Little sister, I thought you had your embroidery to do," Jon said, smiling at her. "We finished, and we were wondering if you'd do a favor for us." "Anything for you, little sister, you know that," Jon said, and she smiled beamingly at him. "Lady always saw your drawing of me and wondered if you'd draw her and the other ladies." Sansa said, Of course it'll take some time, but sure if you wish." "Really, you'll do it?" she said excitedly. "Of course, I'll make some time. How about we start later today?" "Aye, that sounds good," Wille said, smirking. "I thought you were going to show me and Lyanna how to use our bows," Arya said annoyedly. "I will, little wolf. I can do both." At that point, one of the little pups came walking out of the tower. Her gray fur shined in the light, and she wagged her tail as she walked towards her. Sansa bent down to pick her up when Jon nodded, and she giggled when the wolf licked her face. "It seems you're not the only one. The wolves like Arya," Loras said, chuckling. "They still like me more stupid," Arya said, and Loras chuckled louder as he jumped out of the way of a kick to his shins. "Fool me once, little wolf," Loras said, and the others laughed. After holding the she-wolf for a few moments, Jon took it from her and placed it back beside its mother. Ghost came walking over, carrying some meat in his mouth, and Jon led him inside the tower and locked the door. Before leading them all away, while speaking to Arya and Lyanna as they entered the courtyard, she noticed her mother standing on the walkway, holding Bran in her arms. Her brother had spent far more time with her mother the last week or so, and Sansa hoped he was feeling well. She watched as a man approached Jon, holding a letter, and a frown appear on her brother's face as he took it from him. The man turned and left, and Jon placed the letter in his pocket, shaking his head. After that, they moved to the sparring yard, and she looked on as Jon and Loras spoke to Robb. Holding a sword in his hand, they both showed him some movements and pointed out something about his feet. There was no actually sparring, though, as Jon left to go to the archery area with Arya and Lyanna, and Mira and Jojen, along with Lyar, went back into the keep. "Lord Robb, I was wondering if you'd show me the glass gardens," she heard Winterfell say, and she looked to Loras who smiled at her. "Lady Sansa, will you and your friends like to accompany us?" Loras said, and she smiled as she took his arm. Jon. After taking the letter, he walked to the archery yard. Walder had asked to guard him days ago, and while Jon had known it was what he wanted and what he had agreed to, he knew the man was still grieving. So he told him to take some time, spend it with those around Winterfell he felt close to. They'd be leaving here soon, and it would be a long time before they returned. Walder had eventually agreed, and so it was, as always, Jars and Allers who stayed with him. Jaime had told them to guard him loosely while in the confines of the keep, but once they left Winterfell, they'd be much closer. He actually felt sorry for the two men, though they never complained, and so he'd given them the day off, allowed them to spend some time in Wintertown, and had given them enough coin to enjoy themselves, which was why the man handing him a letter had chosen now to do so. He knew who it was from, and he was glad of it as he needed to make his own plans with Richard. "Look, Jon, I hit it," he heard Arya say happily. He looked up from where he'd been sitting and saw she had managed to hit the target, though it was one of the outer rings. His sister didn't have the strength required for drawing the bow properly, but Mikken had allowed for this. The draw weight was suited to her small frame, and the arrows themselves lighter, and, though the ends were blunted, they still stuck in the softer targets. Lyanna Mormont, too, had been able to use the same bow, and it had led to him needing to have one made for her, too, much to her mother's delight. "Great work, Arya. Lyanna. Why don't you take your go?" Jon said. It felt strange to be saying his mother's name out loud, and he enjoyed how it felt, even if it was directed at someone else. Well, Lyanna Mormont and Arya were a match made in heaven, two fierce little girls, and he couldn't help compare both of them to his mother. Had she been alive, would she be teaching his own little sisters to fire their own bows? He wondered. Would she have taught Rhaenys too? Before he could start feeling the sadness he felt when he thought of his sister and mother, he heard a clapping sound and turned to see Lady Mage standing there. "Well done, Lyanna," he heard the woman say, as Lyanna, too, hit the target. "My lady," he said, standing up. "Don't mind me, Jon. It's good to see you spend time with the little ones," Maegid said as she walked towards him. "I enjoy it, my lady. Arya and Lyanna, both of them. I enjoy spending time with them. They remind me of the tales I've been told of Lady Lyanna," Jon said, stumbling over what to call his mother. "I knew Lyanna. Jon knew her well. She and I were friends. Did you know that?" "I didn't, my lady," Jon said, surprised. "The she-bear and the she-wolf, though she was much younger than me, we spent a lot of time together whenever I could visit. There are not a lot of ladies like she was, even here in the north, so we stuck together. You see, did you like her, my lady?" "Lyanna was the most amazing woman I've ever known, Jon. That's why I named my daughter after her. Look at her, Jon. If she grows into half the woman Lyanna was, I'll be the proudest mother in the north," Maege said as Jon looked to see Arya and Lyanna giggling while lining up their next shot. "I wish I could have known her," Jon said sadly. "She'd have been proud of you, Jon. Of that I've no doubt," Maege said, smiling as she patted him on the shoulder. "Lyanna, Arya, come. Let's leave Jon here alone. The girls are going to be sparring soon. Don't you want to see your sisters beat some men up?" "Lyanna," Maegid said, laughing, and Arya and Lyanna ran after her as she turned to leave. Jon walked over to pick up the bow and the arrows before bringing them back inside the keep. He left them in the armory where his uncle had ordered them to be kept, well out of the reach of Arya without supervision. Sitting down on the bench, he took the letter out of his pocket, opened it, and began to read. "I'm at your service. Anything you wish." The smoking log. Razir. Walking to the nearby torch, he held the letter up to it until it burned and walked back to his room. Unlocking the door, he grabbed some parchment and began to write. He would spend most of the day drawing since he'd promised Sansa, but he had time to make it there and back, so once he was finished with his letter, he locked the door and went looking for Walder. He could of course go to Wintertown alone, but he knew how Jaime would feel about it, and given how nervous he was about the upcoming wedding, it would be best to make things easy for him. When he found Walder and explained what he wanted, the man was only too eager to accompany him. The great sword he carried was sturdy, but not of the best quality, and Jaime had ordered Mikken to make a better one. Leaving the keep and heading out the gates, they walked the short distance to Wintertown. Walder would need more practice riding, and Jon had thought that he would need a ward to help him, and they would need a destrier to carry his weight comfortably. "Are you sure we should be doing this, Jon?" Walder asked. "It'll be fine, Walder. We'll just be in and out, back before anyone even knows we're missing." When they reached the smoking log and entered, Jon was surprised at just how full it was. Some of the Lannister men had taken to staying in town and had made it almost their second home. He noticed the man immediately, and when he saw him, he nodded to the upstairs. Jon and Walder followed him, and when they reached the room, Walder insisted on entering first. Once he was satisfied, Jon and the man entered too. "What's your name?" Jon asked. "David, my lord." "And how do you know my friend?" "I was lucky enough to meet him a few years ago, my lord. He helped me out of some trouble, and I've been working with him ever since." "What's his sigil?" "Skulls and lips, my lord," David said with a smile. "Very good. Can you get this to him?" Jon said, handing him the letter. "Aye, my lord. He'll have it within the moon." "So quick?" Jon said, surprised. "Aye, we have a system in place, my lord." Jon took out a few silver stags and coppers and handed it to the man. Gold dragons would be no use to him here, and though David tried to reject them, Jon just shook his head, and in the end he took them gladly. He and Walder soon left, and Jon smirked at Richard's foresight. He had told him he'd organize a way to communicate while in the north, and Jon had doubted him, not anymore. When they arrived back at Winterfell, Jon went to Luwin for more supplies. The maester had refused his coin to pay for them, much to Jon's annoyance. Once he had the parchment, inks, and charcoals, he went in search of his sister and her friends. It'd be a busy few days until the wedding itself. Ned. He was starting to hate these meals. A full-on feast was bad enough, and there would be one tomorrow for the wedding itself. But even these normal meals had turned into basically the same thing. He had accepted reluctantly Jaime Lannister's offer to reimburse and pay for the festivities, and those leading up to them. The simple truth was that given how long he had stayed here, how many of his bannermen had arrived, and how much of their stock they had gone through, the help was welcome. His wife sat beside him speaking to Lady Sibel, and Lady Janelle, the Mormont ladies not being the friendliest to her. He sighed as he looked at her. It had been weeks now since they'd shared a bed. She simply could not get over her feelings for his nephew. No matter what he said or what Jon himself had done, it made no difference. He looked down to the table where Jon was sitting with his children and the others that at least he had rectified. After what happened at the welcome for the Glovers and Manderleys, he and Kat had their biggest fight yet. He had allowed her feelings to cloud his own and had Jon seated away from the other children, and it had backfired terribly. Having Loras Tyrell move to sit by Jon was one thing. Having Jaime Lannister not only do the same, but call him out publicly on it was even worse, and it had led to a huge argument with Kat. "Have you any idea of the damage we've done?" "Why, my lord?" "By seating a bastard in his proper place." "His name is Jon, my lady, and I'll not have you refer to him in any other way in my presence," he said angrily. "So now I'm forced to address your bastard by a title in my own home. You're forced to behave like a lady in public. What we did tonight was wrong, and we'll suffer from it no more. From now on, Jon will sit with his brothers and sisters. My lady and I'll hear no more about it." She had stormed from his solar, and they had been apart ever since. In the end, he had spoken to Vainch to ensure that even without his presence, Jon was to be seated with family. As he continued to look at him, he smiled at how right it looked. His daughters loved their brother. Young Bran, though not having spent much time with him, clearly did too. As for Robb, it seemed after their talk he too had started to come around. And as he looked at his son laughing at something Jon said, he felt they were finally getting back to normal. Though he would soon need to speak to Jon himself, something he had been putting off ever since his talk with Nan. What she had told him, what he had found out since then, he shook his head. How could he have been so blind? He nodded to Vaon, and bid the man to come to him. When he did, he whispered in his ear for him to have Jon meet him later on in the crypts. They would talk tonight. Though he tried to enjoy the rest of the meal, he found his mind drifting, and he couldn't stop where it went, no matter how hard he tried. A few days earlier, he walked to the older part of the keep. Nan had always refused to move to different rooms, saying these had been hers for longer than he had been alive, and she would be in them until she died. When he entered the room and saw her, he felt that maybe far sooner than any of them wished. She sent Walder to fetch Jon and bid him to come closer to her. When he got to the bedside, he was surprised and a little shocked by the slap she hit him across the face. "That's to knock some sense into you, Ned Stark, to remind you that you're a wolf, not a trout, and not a damn falcon," she said. "No, it's time you learned the truth of things. I've not long left, and while I've done what I'm supposed to, I'll not leave this world without telling you the truth of things. You need to support him, Ned, for if you don't, then not just you and your family will suffer, but the North as a whole will be no more." "What do you mean?" "In time, first you need to know the truth of things. Of Brandon and Lyanna, of your father and that damn Maester Wades. He listened to, and you need to accept it, Ned Stark, or so help me. When I'm gone, I'll return and haunt you for the rest of your days." "What do you mean? What truth?" "Your father knew of Lyanna and Rhaegar. He knew of Brandon and Ashara, and he hid the truth about them both." Nan said, and Ned almost fell from his seat. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Would he not? How many times did your sister tell him or you that she wouldn't marry Robert? How many times did you ignore her pleas? Or am I mistaken? Ned shook his head, unable to answer. He knew what she said was the truth. He could remember playing off his sister's concerns as nothing more than nerves, and he had continually taken Robert's side. "Brandon!" "He and your father had a knockdown fight when he received the letter from the Tullys, saying Brandon wished to break off the betrothal. He demanded your brother live up to his responsibilities, or he'd disinherit him. but when did Brandon ever do what he was bid? Why would my father not accept it? Partly the shame of it. To break one betrothal was bad enough. To break two. She sighed. But more than that, it defeated his plans, defeated his desires that the master whispered in his ears. To bring the North and the South closer together would be beneficial. You see, though your father was but a pawn in the games they play, I don't understand. No, that's the problem, Ned. Summer is coming to an end. It's time to prepare for winter, for it is coming, and this one will be harsher and more deadly than any before it. And you don't understand. It's time to be a wolf again. It's time to howl. Aye. Your father has private papers, Ned. In his solar, I believe. Though I'm not certain, I doubt he destroyed them. As for the Meister, well, perhaps this new one knows more. He seems a different sort. You need to find them, Ned, and you need to choose. One way leads to the ruin of your house, and the other, its only salvation. She had said, her voice breaking as she coughed. So he had gone and searched his father's solar, practically torn it apart, and eventually, when the desk and papers were strewn all around the room, and when he'd given up hope, he found them, hidden behind the fire. The letter from Hoster was damning, the ones from Lyanna and Rhaegar even more so, and Ned had spent the night in his solar in a fury. The next day he had gone to see Luwin and asked him to look through any records from Wallace's time as Maester. He had been surprised when the man came back with some notes and a journal. It had taken him days to read through it, and each new revelation forced him deeper and deeper into his head. They had planned it, his fostering in the Vale, his befriending of Robert, hoping to build ties between the North and the South, the things the Maester wrote about his sister, his father, he, and his brothers. It had taken all his strength of will not to rip the journal apart, but Jon would need it. Perhaps he could find out exactly who it was. Rhaegar was in league with. The thoughts it was Jon Arryn or Robert himself kept him up at night. Jon's letter from his mother said they'd been planning it for years. Rhaegar seemed to back it up, and Ned wondered who it was he could trust. Who more than family? Ned, he heard his wife's voice. What sorry cat, he said, turning to look at him. Look at her with concern. Are you feeling well? No, actually, I think I may need to retire early, he said, looking around the room disappointed to see it so full. Surely not yet, she said, and he nodded. He'd grin and bear it some more. It was a few hours later when he finally managed to leave. The dinner had finished and the children had gone to bed. Jon had looked up to him and nodded, letting him know he'd meet him later. He bid Cat good night and went to his room. The journal and the letters were locked in a box hidden in the wall. He knew he'd need them later, or more importantly, Jon would. So he sat nursing a mug of ale. He hadn't drank or eaten much tonight, knowing what he was about to do, but he finished this mug off. When he did so, he got up and headed to the crypts. For the last few nights, he'd gone there at the hour of the wolf and stood in front of his family's statues. He'd cursed his father and had asked his brother why he hadn't told him, why he had felt the need to keep secrets from him. But as always, it was his sister's he had spent the most time at. He had begged her forgiveness and had cried in front of her statue more than once. He heard the footsteps as Jon walked towards him. He had left Alan and Jory at the crypt door tonight. Apart from Jon, no one would be allowed in. What was said here tonight was for his ears alone. When his nephew saw where he was standing, he moved beside him and said, "Not a word." Both of them standing, looking at her statue in silence. She was the fiercest, most full-of-life person I've ever known. Though Arya comes close, Ned said, and heard a small chuckle from Jon, before he continued speaking. There wasn't a boy in the North who didn't wish her to be his Jon. Not a one. You can ask them if you don't believe me. Glover, Manderley, even the great Jon. Not a one who wouldn't have taken her for their own, should she allow them. When Robert saw her, he was no different, and I wanted it so badly. Jon, he was my brother by choice. I see it with you and Loras, and it makes me smile. You have that, and yet I know that, unlike me, you'd pick Sansa over him, or Arya, if you were forced to choose. Not that he'd ever ask you to, and I suppose Robert didn't ask me either. Instead, it was my own damn folly. I should have listened to her. Gods, if I'd only listened. Ned said as tears fell from his eyes. Uncle, I can't forgive you for her, only for me, and for that, it's yours if you want it. Jon said, and Ned nodded. I don't want to fight another war, Jon. I wish I could go my whole life without one, but Jaime Lannister is right. War is coming, and the only thing left is to decide whose side you're on. You may not have my name, Jon, but you have my blood, and should you ask it of me, you shall have my sword and the North. Uncle, Jon began as Ned hushed him before taking his sword and kneeling. I, Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Lord Paramount, and Warden of the North, do hereby pledge my sword, my life, to the one true king, Jacaerys Targaryen, the third of his name, king of the Andals, the Ronard and the First Men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms, protector of the realm. Jon. He had looked on stunned as his uncle declared for him. He couldn't help it. He bid his uncle to rise, and once he did, Jon grabbed him and held him tight. He didn't even try to fight the tears that fell. His uncle whispered in his ear, and Jon couldn't even make out the words. When he calmed enough, they spoke a little on his mother. His uncle told him about the letters and journal he found, and Jon did his best to keep his anger in check. His mother's letter was right. He had always known it to be true, but this proved that she may not have known just how deep this conspiracy went. We need to find them, Uncle. All of them. Jon said, and his uncle nodded. Aye, we do, but that's something we can talk about later. You need to get your rest, Jon. Tomorrow is a big day. Aye, Uncle, thank you, he said as he smiled, and they both left the crypts together. He walked back to the keep with his uncle, both of them walking silently. Behind them, Jory and Alan had given them room. Should they need to speak more, but Jon could tell his uncle was just like he, drained. So they bid their good nights, and he went to his room. Opening the door, he quickly undressed and got the eggs from their hiding place before he lay down on the bed and closed his eyes. His heart raced when he saw her sitting there on the grass hill. It had felt like forever since he'd last seen his sister. Right, where have you been? He asked as he moved towards her. I was flying, Jay, she said, smiling, before she reached her hand out, and he took it. They walked down the hill, and Jack saw it then, the large, dark, burned walls of Harrenhal. He saw the tents lined up and the banners waving high, the black bats on a yellow field and the leaping silver trout on red and blue, both either side of the red three-headed dragon on black, his house's banner raised far higher than the other two. Excitedly, he moved with Rhaenys through the castle. He saw squires scrubbing armor and polishing swords, saw horses being decked out in barding being made ready for upcoming jousts. When they reached the castle, Rhaenys led him to the largest of the halls, the famous Hall of 100 Hearths. Inside, the revelry had already begun, and as he looked around, he saw her sitting there with his uncles, all four of the Stark children together for perhaps one of the last times it was so. His uncle Brandon was just as he'd imagined him, larger than life and louder than his siblings combined. Ned was quiet, and Jay grimaced at the figure sitting beside him as Robert towered above them all, the demon of the trident, indeed. His uncle Benjen looked so very small in comparison, and even his mother seemed larger and more imposing than he. As for his mother, Jay stood and watched. Whether or not tears registered in this place he knew not, but they fell down his face all the same. She was lively, and he watched as she glowered at something Robert said, as she chastised Brandon for some unknown reason, and then spoke softly to Ned. She laughed with Benjen, and then a hush came over the hall, and Rhaenys drew his attention to the high table. Look, Jay, father, she said, and she smiled as he looked to where she pointed. On the high table, he saw him, and he was everything he had heard. He sat beside Eolie, and in her hands she held a newborn babe. Jay looked to Rhaenys and saw her nod as she looked at her younger self. They stayed for a moment, and then Jay found himself outside the halls, yet again watching as his mother put armor on. The Knight of the Laughing Tree in full gear was small and slight, and yet Jay knew from the tale Yemi told that she defeated 3 knights. He longed to see the joust itself, but instead he found himself by a stream and watched as his father held his mother in his arms. It wasn't but a moment later that they were in a glade, and Jay saw 2 men wearing white cloaks stand by, while in front of them, kneeling facing a heart tree. His father and mother whispered softly, Jacob, we have more to see, Rosied, grabbing his arm, and yet he found himself unable to move. He looked as his father and mother kissed, and he saw it there in their eyes. The love his mother wrote of was undeniable. As he closed his own, he then found himself in a large room with colored glass on the windows. At the front stood a man holding a book, and in front of him his father and mother stood facing each other. His mother was draped in a cloak bearing his house's colors, and she had a piece of cloth over her in his father's hands. As he moved closer, he heard them speak. Father, smith, warrior, mother, maiden, crone, stranger, I am hers and she is mine, from this day until the end of my days. As Rhaenys led him out of the room, he looked back, and a part of him wanted nothing more than to shout at them, to scream out a warning, to let them know how things would be. He opened his mouth to do so, but before he got the chance to speak, he saw the clouds and the images began to change. At first, it was random images, his uncle Brandon kissing a beautiful woman, his mother shouting at Robert, his father, and Elia speaking softly. But then he felt Rhaenys's hand grip him tight, and the clouds fully darkened overhead. He saw a silver-haired girl walk into a fire as a large dog whined as the flames drew closer. He saw the girl walk out unharmed, while 3 small dragons crawled over her shoulders. In the distance he saw a pale dragon fade in the sun, while a black wingless dragon ran as fast as it could towards her. He saw a sword with a white blade cut through a net, and a hand grab a lion with a scorpion's tail. He saw the beast being tied to a stake before it shriveled and faded away. He saw a snake poised to attack only to turn its head as it heard the hisses of smaller snakes. He saw the snake as it was grabbed by a giant. He saw the giant smile as he brought the snake to his mouth, only for a screech to force him to look up, where a white dragon flew close to him. Its blue wings unfurled and the giant dropped the snake as a white wolf came up from behind. He saw a huge gray wolf howl as it looked to a silver wingless bird, its steps purposeful as it was joined by smaller, hungrier wolves. He saw a 3-eyed raven try to fly as a tree burned, only for a white wolf to jump and catch it in its mouth. When he turned to Rhaenys, he saw her smile, and she pointed as the dragon landed in front of them. He watched his sister climb on the dragon's back and hold out her hand. "We can fly together, Jay," she said as the dragon flew off. When he woke that morning, he felt the heat from the eggs. He felt the sweat run down his chest and onto the sheets of the bedding, and as he jumped up, he felt his head spin. He steadied himself and placed the eggs back in their hiding place, and after drinking some water, he sat down and began to draw. Rob. Theon had stopped him on the way to break his fast, and Rob felt guilty. He'd been ignoring him these last few days, but he found he was still annoyed at him, too. During the spar against Dolores, he had seen Theon leave him to face the boy alone. His friend had been hurt, but not that badly, and yet he didn't come to his aid. Had he then, Rob wouldn't have taken such a bad beating, but rather than admit it or apologize, Theon had instead wanted them to make up stories about Jon and Loras, or to try and get their vengeance some other way. Even had his father not called them in to punish them. Rob had already begun to question how things had gone since Jon arrived. From his turning down of the gifts Jon offered at Theon's suggestion, to him trying to bait his brother to spar and allowing Theon to insult his sister to do so. After his father had brought that up, Rob felt more shame than he could ever remember. He had been at best a bad brother, and at worst a terrible one, and just seeing Jon with his sisters showed him how far he had fallen short. "So you're not speaking to me then, too busy with your new friends?" Theon said, annoyedly. "No, you know we're not allowed to speak together," Father made that clear. "So, since when do you care about what your father says?" "He is my father. I always care," Rob retorted angrily. "So what? That's it then? Your bastard brother is here, and that's it for me. We were supposed to be brothers." Theon said, a note of sadness in his voice. We were. But what happened during the spar at Theon? Where were you? Brothers don't leave each other to be hurt. Where were you?" Rosied, shaking his head. "I was hurt, Theon said, and Rob could see the truth in front of him. "No, you weren't. You'd just rather protect yourself than me," Rob said as he walked away. He felt terrible doing so, but after being punished and told he and Theon would no longer be allowed to spend time together, his father had kept him behind while he sent Theon off with his new guards. "You're not happy I've forbidden you from being with Theon, are you?" "No, father. He's my friend." "I wanted that for you. Since Jon left, I wanted it so badly. But I was wrong, Rob. It was never supposed to be Theon. It was supposed to be your brother, but with him gone, I allowed Theon take his place." "But why now, father?" "Why all of a sudden have you decided that I'm not to spend time with him?" "What happened with your sister, Rob?" his father asked, and he looked down to the ground, the shame clear on his face. "That's why, son. What have I told you about the pack?" "That we must stick together, always." Theon is not a wolf. Rob, he's a squid should his father rise up one day. I may be forced to take his head. I've forgotten that, forgotten how the North sees him. Forgotten he's a hostage, Rob, not a ward. But he's my friend, father. Aye, but he shouldn't be. One day you'll be Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North. What happens if, when that day comes, our bannermen see you as best friends with the family who've reaved their lands, the people who've stolen their property and attacked them all their lives? But would it not be better if we were friends, father? Maybe Theon would be different than his father. Maybe the Iron Islands and the North could be allies. Rob said, and his father shook his head. I thought that, son, but I didn't realize that he was insulting my daughters, that he and you were behaving badly towards visiting lords. No, don't give me that look, boy. I saw how you both looked at the reeds, at Howland's children. What have I told you about Howland's son? That were it not for Howland Reed, you'd not be alive today. Aye, so how do you think I feel seeing his children disrespected by mine own heir? I'm sorry, father. Aye, I know that, Robs. What happens when Jon leaves again, father? Who'll be my friend then? I'll think of something, son. I promise. Now as he headed to his brother's room, he hoped he'd accept his apology. They had spoken, and being friendly since the night the Manderleys arrived, he and Loras had spent some time together too. But while Jon had taught him some moves in the sparring yard, and while he and Loras had japed with him, there was something not right about it. Compared to how Jon acted with his sisters, he was still an outsider, and he knew it was because, as of yet, he hadn't spoken to him about things. He knocked at the door and looked down at the scratches he'd made when he tried to sneak inside. It had been a stupid idea, but he had been embarrassed to ask his brother for the gifts he'd already turned down, so he had tried to steal them. Thankfully, he'd not been able to open the door how he'd have been able to deal with things had he taken the gifts he didn't know. "Robe," he heard his brother say as he opened the door. "Jon, can I come in?" "Aye," his brother said, and he walked in. His brother's room was cold and a little damp, and yet not once had he heard him complain. Looking around it, though, he wondered how it compared to his rooms at Casterly Rock. Surely Jaime Lannister had him stay in better rooms than this. He looked to the table and saw some drawings before Jon motioned to the bed, and he sat down while Jon sat at the small table. "Jon, I wanted to say I'm sorry," Robb said, looking down at his fidgeting hands. "For what?" Jon asked, his voice even. "I should have welcomed you better. You're my brother, and Robb, I don't care how you welcomed me. I'm used to it. I was annoyed at you over Sansa, over Theon." Jon said, shaking his head, as Robb looked at him. "I allowed your friend to insult our sister. That's all that bothered me, Robb." "I'm sorry. Tell Sansa—" "What?" "Speak to Sansa, Robb. Tell her you're sorry. She may not show it, but it hurt her," Jon said. "I will," Robb said determinedly. "Good. Now come, brother. Let's spar. Properly this time." Jon said, and Robb laughed before he stopped. "Jon, I did something stupid." "Well, Arya would say you are stupid," Jon said, and they both chuckled. I tried to sneak into your room," he said, embarrassed. "Why?" Jon said, his voice rising.
"My gods."
"I wanted the gifts," he said, and Jon laughed before he got up and walked to his chest and picked up the bow and pendant. "You only had to ask, brother." "You mean it? I can have them?" Robb asked, surprised. "Of course, they were always for you." He placed the pendant around his neck and held the bow out. As he stood up, he saw the picture Jon had been drawing fall to the floor and bent down to pick it up. "Who's this Jon?" "That's Uncle Brandon, Benjen, Lord Stark, and your Aunt Lyanna," Jon said. And Robb didn't notice the odd choice of words as he looked at the picture. "Why did you draw this?" he asked, curiously. "It's a gift," Jon said as he took and placed it back on the table. "Now come on, or I'll make you face Mira and her spear," Jon jabbed, and he laughed as they left the room. "Megulta." She looked on as her daughters readied the dress for Daisy. It was a beautiful thing, and out of all her daughters, it was her oldest who she knew would appreciate it the most. While Jory and Lyra would wear dresses tonight, it was not their preferred outfits, as for Alysanne, well, she was like her. There wasn't a reason big enough to wear a dress in either of their opinions. She smiled, though, at Lyanna and how she looked at her own dress, her little bear cub's face, a picture as she looked annoyed at the straps of the thing. Daisy sat on the bed laughing and joking with her sisters, and Megju was about to say something when there was a knock on the door that Jory answered. She was surprised to see Wyman standing there. "My ladies, forgive the interruption, Megye. I was wondering if I could speak to you," Wyman said, and she nodded. She followed him outside, and he motioned for her to follow him some more. As they walked through the keep and out into the courtyard, she wondered where he was bringing her. A few moments later, she got her answer. They walked past the broken tower, and she saw Jon Snow play with the White Wolf while holding one of the pups in his hand. To see them here finally in the heart of the North was sight. She'd not soon forget, and it was no surprise to her that it was Jon to be the one to bring the wolves back where they belonged. She followed Wyman onward, and through the small gate into the Godswood. It took them a few more moments until they finally saw the Heart Tree and Ser Wylis, and a couple of Manderley guards standing by it. It surprised her he'd brought her here, given his own view on the old gods, although she knew he respected them all the same. "Make sure we're not disturbed, son," Wyman said as he stood before the tree. "What's going on, Wyman?" "What think you of the lad Megja?" Wyman asked. "What lad?" she said, though she knew of whom he spoke. Jon, Wyman said, and she noticed he didn't use the bastard surname. Seems like a good lad, did a lot for both our families, did he not? She said, raising an eyebrow. Aye, that he did. He's just like his mother, isn't he? Wyman said, and she gasped for a second. I wouldn't know, Wyman, she answered, evasively. Really? Remember where we are, Meg? Wyman said, and she cursed the man. No one's ever mentioned his mother, she said, and Wyman smirked. Yet we both know who she is. Do we indeed? Aye, he's the she-wolf's babe of that, I've no doubt. Neither do you, Meg. And so what if he is? She asked. Then that makes him our king. Wyman said, and this time she needed to sit down. Careful, Wyman. What you speak now is treason. Is it? I never swore an oath to the stag, did you, Meiji? I'd rather slit my own throat than swear to that man, how he behaved. Love of his life, indeed, she said as she spat on the ground. Indeed, I heard the stories, though did not see for myself, but I remember Harrenhal Magage, he shamed her there too. That you did, but does the boy even want it, Wyman? I believe he does. I think he sees how the realm has been run, and he wants to change it. That's what he's doing, is it not? Who else has done as much for the North as he? No one, she said, smiling. You think that's why Jaime Lannister took him as squire? I do. I think he knew. I've seen him with the boy, watched him closely. Did you hear what happened the night we arrived? No. The fish saw fit to seat the lad in the low tables. His young friend, the Tyrell boy, immediately sat beside him. When Jaime Lannister came in, he called out Ned on it. When he refused to change the seating, the man sat with him. That's not something a knight does for a squire, is it? No, it's not, she said, smiling broadly. It's also not the first time. When they arrived, she tried to have the wolf placed in kennels, a dire wolf mage here in Winterfell, and she wanted it locked away. The lad just nodded, got back on his horse, and said he'd stay in Wintertown. Young Loras and Jaime jumped on their horses and did the same. She pictured the scene in her head. He was his mother's son, all right, and the laugh she let out was loud and genuine. You think Ned will support the lad? Nags, he asked. He better? That boy is of the North. May. Aye, that he is, Wyman. Daisy! She allowed her sisters to fix her hair. Jory especially, working hard on it. She put the dress on and stood in front of the looking-glass. She had never looked better than she looked tonight, and she was as ready as she'd ever be. Her mother smiled at her, before coming over to whisper how proud she was of her, how happy she was for her, and Daisy did her best to hold her tears at bay. Her sisters went out to take up their positions, and her mother stood beside her, waiting to be called. Do you like him, Mother? She asked nervously. He makes my girl happy, does he not? He does, Mother. Very much so. Then I like him. Should he not then? He'll feel the full fury of me and your sisters, though, her mother said, and she laughed. She stood nervously on her toes, waiting for the knock at the door to tell them it was time. Her mother, for the first time she could ever remember, looked just as nervous as she did. It took what felt like an age, but when the girl knocked at the door, she almost ran to open it. It's time, my lady, the girl said. She walked out with her mother slowly, the walk to the Godswood taking them past servants and small folk. Jaime had ordered celebrations in Wintertown that he was paying for. He'd invited some of the people to the feast itself, and she loved him even more for it. When they entered the Godswood, she saw the lanterns hanging from the trees. Little lights which looked like fireflies in the night. The place itself was full of people, and she shivered as her mother led her to the end of the pathway. Standing in front of her, leaning against a tree, was her betrothed, and he looked even more handsome than ever. He wore a black leather coat which came down to his knees. Underneath, she could see his shirt was blood red. His leather breeches were form-fitting, and she found herself inevitably drawn to how tight they molded against his arse. He caught her looking, and she smiled as he winked at her. Who comes before the old gods this night? Ned Stark said loudly. Lady Daisy Mormont of House Mormont, a woman grown, true-born, and noble, her mother said loud and proud. Who comes to claim her? Lord Jaime Lannister of House Lannister. Jaime said, and she smiled at the simplicity of his answer. Who gives her? He asked. Lady Max Mormont, her mother, said as they walked forward, and she stood beside him. Lady Daisy, will you take this man? Ned Stark said. I take this man, she said, her smile only outshone by his own. He took her hand, and as they knelt, her eyes closed, she prayed she'd make him as happy as he did her, that they'd spend their lives together, grow old together, have children, and be as one. As they stood up and she felt him remove her cloak and hand it to Loras, she saw Jon move forward and hand him her bridal cloak. She felt its warmness as he tied it to her shoulders, and then he leaned forward and kissed her to cheers. She imagined, though she only heard them after the kiss. Within the blink of an eye, he had her cradled in his arms, her hands wrapped around his neck as he carried her to the great hall. "My love," he whispered in her ear. "My life," he said softly. "My wife," he said, and she felt her heart flutter. "My husband, Jaime C." Seeing her as she stood there, he had never in his life seen a more beautiful sight. The dress was a white as snow and embroidered on it in little bits of black and red stone. A bear curled up against a lion. Her hair was tied up and 2 little ringlets hid her shoulders, brushing against the soft skin and making him jealous of them both. When he'd knelt down to pray in front of gods, he didn't really understand. He just asked for the strength to make her happy, to keep her safe, and to bring her the joy she brought him. When he kissed her, it felt different somehow. This wasn't just a woman he was kissing. This was his wife. From this day to his last day, this was the woman he'd spend his life with. Carrying her into the hall, he had been sorely tempted to just change direction, to just head to their room, no longer his alone. But he resisted. Hard though it was, she deserved to enjoy the festivities, for her family to see her and celebrate their wedding, and so he carried her to the high table and placed her in the seat beside his own. "How'd I do?" he whispered. "It was acceptable, I suppose," she japed, and he couldn't help but laugh as he leaned forward to kiss her. Once everyone took their seats, the dishes began to arrive. In the West, he knew there'd be course after course. One wedding he'd heard about in the Reach had 17 courses. Here in the North, his was a more manageable 9. As the dishes came out, he took a bite and began sending them to other tables. The deer he sent to his good family. Elk he sent to the Manderleys. On and on the dishes went, and though he wasn't hungry, he ate from each of them. Beside him, his wife spoke to her mother and Lady Cerwyn, while he spoke to Ned Stark and the Great Jon. He drank sparingly and had to laugh when the Great Jon stood up and called Jon to the table. He saw Ned Stark look at him in confusion, and he just shrugged his shoulders, not knowing what the large Umber Lord was up to. "Josier, lad, why have these drinks no ice in them? Have you not shown the good men and women of Winterfell, along with your father, the way of the future?" The Great Jon's voice boomed over the room. "I haven't, my lord," Jon said, smirking. "This won't do, Ned. You have to try this," the Great Jon said as he nodded to his son. Jaime just looked at the confused face of Ned Stark and waited until the small Jon came back into the room, carrying a large chunk of ice and bringing it to the table. "Go on, Jon, show him," the Great Jon said, grabbing the jug of ale and 2 mugs. Jon began chipping away at the ice and placed it in the mugs. A third one added when Mage saw what was going on and turned to Daisy to ask about it. Once he was done, Jaime watched as the Great Jon filled the mugs and handed one to Mage and to Ned Stark. He saw Wyman chuckling from the side as the mugs were raised. "What is this, Jon?" Ned Stark asked as he licked the ale from his lips. "The ice, my lord. This is just one of the uses for the ice in the south. Don't drink it so fast," Jon said as Ned raised the mug to his lips, and the Great Jon looked disappointedly at them both. "You're no fun, lad," the large man said loudly before a cry was heard to his left. "My head. God's my head," Maggie said, and the Great Jon laughed loudly. See. It's not just us giants that make mistakes, Jon. Even the she-bear can't handle it." "Damn you, Jon Umber. If I had my mace, I'd make your damn head hurt." "Maggie, if you had your mace, I'd have held my tongue," the Great Jon said to laughs. After that, more and more ice was sent for and brought in. He noticed Ned looking at Jon proudly while his wife glowered as she spoke to Lady Sidel, her eyes never leaving them, even as she nodded along to what the other woman was saying. He turned to Daisy to see her smiling as she explained to her mother about the ice and watched on happily as more and more people added it to their drinks. Jon walked back to his table, and he gave the boy a sneaky wink, getting a smirk in return. After that, it was time to hand out gifts to him, and Daisy and Jaime was surprised to see how many of the Northerners brought some. Wyman gave him a beautiful dagger and his wife a matching one, which she appreciated greatly. The Glovers gave some northern linens, so Daisy would always remember what home felt like. "They got some furs from the Umbers for those cold nights," the Great Jon said as he winked, and when Ned Stark and Lady Stark approached, Jaime looked on nervously. "My lord, my lady, from my wife and I, and from all the Starks," Ned said as he handed them 2 items covered in cloth. As he unwrapped it, he was stunned to see them. They were matching bows made of the white wood of the weirwood tree, along with some wooden arrows tipped with fierce curved points. They were fantastic, absolutely otherworldly in their beauty. He could see Daisy's face was just as stunned as his own, though she was far quicker to smile than he. "I thank you, my lord, my lady, for such a wonderful and thoughtful gift," Jaime said. I do too, my lord, my lady. They're truly incredible. Daisy said, smiling at them both. Ned and Lady Stark nodded and took their seats, and then Maege and her daughters presented them with gifts, once again mainly weapons, and had it been anyone else he was marrying, Jaime would laugh at the nature of things. But he knew all the gifts they'd been given were ones his wife would appreciate, and these northerners knew that too. He shook his head to hide the laugh that was building at the thoughts of what gifts she'd receive in their other wedding. My lord, my lady, he heard a soft voice say, and looked to see Jon's sister Sansa standing there, holding a piece of fabric. Lady Sansa, there was no need, he heard Daisy say, but he smiled at the girl reassuringly when she began to look embarrassed. But it is most appreciated, my lady, he said, and she smiled back at him as she handed him the fabric. Opening it up, he unfolded it, and what he saw was truly a work of beauty. The girl had made them a covering for their bed, embroidered it with black bears and golden lions around the edges. It had a golden castle and an island on the top and bottom of it, and at its center, a black bear embraced a gold lion. Written in gold and black were the words, "Here we stand, hear us roar." My lady, this is absolutely incredible. Truly, Jaime said, as he stood up to hold the fabric up so the rest of the room could see. My lords, my ladies, please join me in thanking Lady Sansa for such a wonderful and thoughtful gift. Jaime said as the girl blushed some more and the room starting to cheer. As she ran back quickly to her table, he saw Jon lean over to whisper in her ear when she sat down, and the large smile which appeared on her face. He turned to look at Ned Stark's face, and this time his proud look was even fuller. He looked to see even Lady Stark, who'd looked miserable all night, seemed full of pride in her daughter. Rightly so, he thought as he passed the fabric on to Daisy's family, who looked at it in wonder. It was a few minutes later when Jon and Loras stood in front of him. He had spoken to them earlier and had told them there was no need for gifts, of course, though this was Jon and that was a pointless conversation. Though he still expected them to wait until they reached Casterly Rock and the second wedding, but as his squires approached, he saw Jon hold a piece of parchment in his hand, and he looked at him inquisitively. My lord, my lady, from myself and Loras, Jon said as he handed him the parchment. The drawing was incredibly detailed. His hair was golden, as was his armor, and Daisy looked fit for battle. They stood together, his sword in his hand, her mace in hers, both caught almost as if they were about to strike. He could see the smirk on Daisy's face, both in the drawing and as she looked at it, identical and unbelievably captured. Her fur almost seemed to wave in some unseen wind as the mace looked ready to move through the air. Jon, when did you do this? I've been working on it since we arrived. Loras got the parchment and the colors, Jon said. I thank you both, Jaime said, and Daisy added. It's wonderful, Jon. Loras, thank you, however. As the two boys walked away, Lyra and Jory spoke up. That's your only gift, Jon. I had hoped for a song, at least, Jory said. Aye, Jon, surely you're not going to deny us your voice, Lyra said. Aye, Jon, you must sing. That one you sung at the wall was a good one, Jory said, and Lyra nodded in agreement. James saw the panicked look in Jon's eyes. He looked around to see Ned Stark wearing the same look, while Wyman and Maege Mormont looked on curiously. He saw Jon look to the table where his sister was clapping her hands, Sansa making her choice perfectly clear. He nodded to him when he saw him look to him for guidance. It was no use, he'd not be able to back out, not here, not now. As you wish, my ladies, Jon said as he nodded to Lyra and Jory. Though, when the harp was sent for, he ignored it, making Jaime look at him curiously. My lords, my ladies, for the happy couple, Jon said as he began to sing without music. My love said to me, my mother won't mind, and me father won't slight you, for your lack of kind. Then she stepped away from me, and this she did say, it will not be long, love. Till our wedding day, she stepped away from me, and she moved through the fair, and fondly I watched her. Move here and move there, and she went her way homeward, with one star awake, as the swans in the evening move over the lake. I dreamed it last night, that my true love came in. So softly she entered, her feet made no din. She came close beside me, and this she did say, it will not be long, love, till our wedding day. The song was haunting. The lack of music only made it more so. He looked to Daisy, who he could see was smiling. Though her eyes glistened as he looked around the room, he saw that while she'd kept her composure, others had not. At Jon's table, Sansa was wiping tears from her eyes, while beside her, one of the Manderly girls and another dark-haired girl did likewise. He saw Meg look at Jon with an odd smile on her face, and Wyman also looked on with a beaming one. Ned Stark was looking at him with a look that was hard to identify, while Lady Stark looked angrily at him before she caught Jaime looking to her and her face took on a more neutral look. Jon bowed to him, and Daisy slightly before turning to walk to his table, and that was when the clapping began. By the time he'd sat down, the music had started, and as Jaime took Daisy's hand to lead her to dance, he saw Jon smile at him. Saints, the wedding had been everything she'd dreamed it would be. The lights in the Godswood were almost magical, and the weather had stayed pleasant. She had feared it would rain or snow, but it seemed the gods wished to see this marriage as much as Sansa did. Lord Jaime looked so handsome as he stood there, and she knew she was not the only one who thought so, given the looks he was getting from some of the older women. Beside him, both Jon and Loras had dressed up too, and she had been surprised to see her brother matching Loras's style, as he'd worn much plainer blacks since he'd arrived. Tonight, though, he and Loras had matched. Black long coats, white shirts, with a dash of red on both outfits in the shape of scarves. A nice touch for Lord Yaddy. No doubt. When Daisy had arrived, Sansa, like all the girls with her, couldn't help but admire how beautiful she looked, how incredible her dress was, and how they'd all wish they'd look so good on their own wedding days. The wedding itself was simple and elegant, and when Jaime had picked Daisy up to carry her, Sansa was not alone in almost swooning. At the table during the feast, she and the other girls had spoken of the dress, and the time had passed quickly. When it came to gifting things, she was nervous. She had worked long and hard on her gift. But what if they disliked it? What if it was silly before she could back down, though? Jon had whispered in her ear. "It'll be fine, little sister. Your gift will be the nicest they receive, I promise." Jon had been right and wrong. Her gift had been incredibly well received. Lord Jaime had been so gracious, so kind, even if he had embarrassed her some, and when she sat back down, wanting to hide her face, it was Jon who spoke to her again. "Told you, it was incredible, little sister, so beautiful. I'm so proud of you." She couldn't help but smile. She had thought Jon's drawing to be a much better gift, but it was when they began to speak of Jon's singing that her interest had been perked. "Jon sings?" she asked Mira, who was sitting beside Arya and Lyanna Mormont. "Hey, he's really good," he sang while we were at the wall. "He never sang in White Harbor," Willa said, her annoyance clear in her voice. "No one asked him," Josian said, and he and Lyanna giggled. "Who's singing?" Ira said as she finished the extra dessert she had somehow managed to get while giggling at something. Lyanna Mormont said to her. "Jon," Willa said, while Sansa looked to see Jon look to her. She couldn't help but clap her hands excitedly. She looked on with confusion when Jon turned down the harp. Was he not going to have music, she wondered, though when he began to sing, she realized he didn't need it. The song was beautiful. It was sad, and yet, if felt right, she felt the tears before the song had ended. And by the time it had, she needed her handkerchief. When he came over and sat beside her, she couldn't help but lean in to whisper in his ear. "That was amazing, Jon. Thank you for singing it." "You're welcome, little sister. Now, my lady, would you do me the pleasure of the next dance?" he said as he stood up and bowed with his hand out, making her giggle. "Why, of course, Galanseer," she replied as he took her hand. She saw Lors shake his head before he reluctantly took Wella's hand. Robb asked Wanafred, and she said yes, while Josian was practically dragged onto the floor by Lyra. The music played, and she saw Lord Jaime and Lady Daisy dance and smile at each other. Lors, it turned out, was a terrible dancer, as she saw Wella grimace at him numerous times. Josian, surprisingly, was a good one, given Lyra laughs, though she towered over him. Jon was really good, and she found herself smiling more and more. They danced 2 more songs before Jon asked Mira and then Alice to dance. She had 1 dance with Loras and 1 with Robb before she sat down to rest for a moment. When Jon tried to get Howard to dance, she found herself almost tearing up with laughter. "Please, little wolf, you can't not dance with your brother. Why, I'd be heartbroken not to dance with you," Jon said, his voice feigning hurt. "Go away, stupid." "But, little wolf, I'll be so sad," Jon said, putting on a sad face. "Gods, you really are stupid. Fine, I'll dance, but only 1, and only with you, Jon. I'm not dancing with any of these other stupid boys." "Why, thank you, my lady," Jon said, and Sansa had to choke back her laughter as Arya glowered first at him, and then her. She did see the little smile on Arya's face, though, as she danced with her brother, and when he came back, she giggled again. When Lyanna Mormont said, "Never ever," to him while shaking her head, Jon then held his hand out to her, and so she danced with him instead. Have you enjoyed yourself tonight, little sister? Aye, Jon. Very much so. Good, he said, smiling at her. When they got back to the table, though it was to find her mother waiting for her, her father too, it was time for the children to go to bed, and though she'd have loved to stay, she was actually quite tired. Jon and Loras led her back to her room, Arya and Lyanna already having gone to their own. Jojen, Mira, Liera, and Eluz were also already gone, and Robb had left to escort Winifred and Willa when they left her at her door. Both of them took her hand in turns and kissed it, making her smile. As she climbed into bed, she felt happier than she had for as long as she could remember, but she also had to quieten the little voice at the back of her mind, which was saying that they'd all be leaving soon. Cat. She had outdone herself with the preparations for the wedding. She had organized the feast and the decorations in the Godswood, and at least Jaime Lannister had thanked her, which was more than could be said for his bride. She had to admit Lady Dacey did make a striking-looking bride, but surely when they got back to the West, her manners and upbringing would prove a problem. While here in the North she may pass for a lady, in the South she would certainly not, especially given her propensity for fighting alongside men. However, it was not for her to judge who Jaime Lannister chose as his bride, and so she held her tongue, something that was getting harder and harder to do, especially when it came to the bastard. Her husband had insisted the bastard be treated with more respect than he was due, and so she kept away from him when she could. But it seemed as if he was following her wherever she would go, almost mocking her by how he behaved around his betters. She had managed to keep Brandon away from him mainly. Petter's warnings, though vague, were enough to make her worry. But the rest of her children seemed drawn to him. Even her precious boy, Robb, seemed to want to spend time with him now, though that was his father's fault for taking away his friend. But so far at least the bastard hadn't tried to harm many of her children, at least to her knowledge, though she knew it was only a matter of time. "It's a wonderful occasion, is it not, Lady Stark?" Lady Sibel asked. "Aye, my lady, it is," she said. "You've done an incredible job here, my lady," the woman said, and Kat felt her pride flare up. She really had. As she watched the children get ready to give gifts, she thought back to her own. She had fought with her husband over the boughs as a gift for a wedding. The very thought of it, but he was as stubborn as ever, and so she had swallowed her shame and thanked the gods this was here and not in Casterly Rock. As she watched her daughter move forward, she smiled. Sansa looked resplendent tonight, a true lady, though she would need to speak to her daughter about spending so much time with the bastard. Something that was proving difficult to do, as Sansa seemed to lose her senses when it came to that boy. Septa Mordane had told her of the things her sweet girl had said, and if there was ever proof needed of the duplicity of bastards, that was it. She was only thankful that they were all still so young. Had her girl been a maiden flowered? She shook her head of the thought, instead looking on as Lord Jaime praised her daughter's work. The gift was wonderful, and Kat was so proud of her girl. She would make a lord, or who knows, perhaps even the prince, an incredible wife one day. Her daughter surely deserved to be considered by the crown, especially given Ned's friendship with the king. When the bastard stepped forward with his drawing, she shook her head. It was bad enough he had done that thing with the ice earlier, but now he was interjecting himself once again where he shouldn't. She didn't hear what was said next, but when the boy began to sing, she fumed. Was there no end to it? Was there nothing else the boy would do to garner attention? He has an incredibly voice. Does he not? She heard one of the Mormont girls say to her, and she nodded while struggling to hold a smile on her face. Aye, he does, she said as she turned to see the girl's mother stare directly at her. Despite every fiber of her being demanding her to say something to these women, these savage women, who had come to her home and made it clear just how little they thought of her, she instead smiled politely and returned to her conversation with Lady Sybil. She held her tongue as the bastard danced with her girls, though she couldn't help but smile when she saw how graceful Robb was with the Manderly girl. A good match, perhaps, but she had hoped for better for him, too. A southern rose, or perhaps even the princess, if Sansa didn't marry the prince. Once the dancing was done with and the children sent to their rooms, she knew it wouldn't be long now until the bedding. Thankfully, though, she wouldn't need to be around for it, and so she bid Lady Sibel, the other guests, Lord Jaime and Lady Dacey, her farewells, and kissed her husband's cheek. The first real physical contact they'd had in over a moon, though that was his fault and not hers. She walked to her room, and as she sat down, she fumed. Her life, her home, had all been perfect until the bastard had arrived. Even after everything he did in King's Landing, her husband had not only not punished the boy, but taken up for him every chance he got. Her plans to put him in his rightful place had all been interfered with or foiled somehow, and she could see his corruption swelling in her own children. It couldn't be allowed to stand. Patir could help, but it would take far too long for both her letter to reach him and for him to be able to do anything about the boy. She would need to speak to her brother. They needed to act now, or it would be too late. Hopefully, given his own encounters with the bastard, Edmure would act quickly. Jaime. As it got closer to the time, he wondered how they could get out of this. Abetting at the best of times was not something he enjoyed. When it was his wife who would be getting manhandled, it was going to be something he hated. But tradition was tradition, and when he'd suggested it to Daisy, she had insisted everything would be fine, and for him not to worry about it. Something that was far easier said than done. But he drank his ale slowly, and waited for the time to arrive. "My lords, we've drank, we've feasted, it's time to bed them," the great Jon shouted, and Jaime could have guessed it'd be him, and not Stark, to do so. "Bed them, bed them, bed them," he heard the chants around the room. Where so many people came from, he could not tell. He had not seen that many women at the wedding. He was surprised, though, that none of Daisy's sisters were near as he was grabbed and shoved and parts of his clothing torn from him. He looked around to see his wife surrounded by her sisters, and then both Umber lords backing away, trying to focus. As one woman's hand went to a very private area, he saw the reason and couldn't help but laugh. "Thank you, Jon," he whispered as he saw the White Wolf stare down. Any man who dared get too close to his wife. Though as he felt his breeches being torn from him, he for a moment wished the White Wolf was guarding him too. On and on it went, and they dragged him down the hall, his coat long gone, his shirt and undershirt torn to pieces. His breeches had thankfully not been torn much, though they were almost off him now. He turned to see where they were, and was glad they were close to his room. When he finally felt his breeches fall, he had made it to the door. His small clothing was basically gone. He grabbed some of the ripped material and jumped into the room. Outside the noise was louder and louder, and as he looked around the room to find something to cover himself with, the door opened. His wife entered fully dressed, and Jaime couldn't help but laugh at the look on her face. She eyed him up and down before she too began to laugh. "Unlike you, I didn't have a wolf to protect me." "Ah, poor little Jaime, has your squire abandoned you for me?" she said softly. "Actually, I think he was doing me a favor, actually. Now I get to tear your clothes off, myself," he said as he jumped towards her. "Jaime Lannister," she shrieked. "Daisy Lannister," he said as he grabbed her. He kissed her softly at first and then more passionately. Moving her towards the bed, he began to slowly undress her. They had waited so long for this, he had waited so long for this, that now, even as nervous as he felt, he took his time. "Relax, my love. We have the rest of the night," she said. "We have the rest of our lives," he whispered back as he kissed her neck. "Daisy." As she woke up, she felt his arms around her, her head resting on his muscular chest. When they had finally succumbed to sleep, she knew not. Only that she was tired and fulfilled. It had been everything she had dreamed it would. Everything she had hoped, as she felt him stir beside her. She smiled and kissed his soft lips. I could get used to being awakened like this." "Well, don't. I intend for you to be the one who wakes first," she said, as she bit his lip softly. "Good morning, wife," he said, looking into her eyes. "Good morning, husband. Do we really have to get up?" he sighed. "We do. I'm hungry," she said. "Me too," he rolled on top of her. "Louisier." "Daisy," he replied, matching her tone and making her giggle. "Come, we must get up. Gods knows what time of day it is." Reluctantly, he agreed, and they got dressed, though she did spend most of the time watching him. His arse was a thing of beauty. Old gods, new gods, whomever made it should be most pleased with their work. She certainly was. Shaking her head, she dressed, and they both left the room, walking down the corridor to the great hall to break their fast. When they arrived, she was dismayed to see it was far earlier than she had imagined. The hall was full, and the cheers and japes began immediately. "Didn't expect to see you for the rest of the day." "Surely you're not tired of each other already?" "Well, he does look worn out." She could have sworn the last one came from her mother. She looked to the children's table and saw looks of confusion mixed with the odd smirk. Both Jon and Loras would pay for that later if she had her way. Sitting down beside her mother and sisters, Jaime sat opposite, and both of them hungrily ate, giving yet another reason for jacks to be made at their expense. "How are you feeling, my love?" he mother whispered to her. "I'm good, mother. Better than good. Great," she said, smiling back at her. Once done with their meal, she had enough. It was time for some of these men to be put in their place. Jape at her expense, would they? Let's see how they liked a mace across their thick skulls. Fine. Who's up for a spar? Daisy said, and looked to see Jaime smiling broadly at her. My husband, she thought, and felt her heart was complete for the first time. The Westerlands, 24 Uxak. Jerio. Riding to Casterly Rock had become a chore, not the journey itself, but the knowledge that once there, he would spend only a little time with Joy before once again setting off for Castamere. The castle had come along really well. It would be another year, though, until he felt comfortable for Joy to live there, but he was no longer sure if that was for the best. Something which had preyed on his mind more and more as he was torn between his own selfish desires to be with his daughter and what was best for Joy herself. As much as he wished his daughter to be with him, Castamere wasn't where she should be brought up. In time, the town he was building, the surrounding lands, would be suitable for his girl. But for now, she needed to be with family to enjoy everything she could about those happy days at the Rock. As he reached the castle, he cleared his head and instead looked forward to spending a few days with her, even if it meant being near that demon cat of hers. "Me lord, welcome back," the stable lad said as he took his horse. It's good to be back. Look after her for me." "Will you, lad?" he said, handing the boy a few coppers. "I will, thanks, me lord." He walked to the lift and took it up to the family wing. The ride had been its usual uncomfortable self, and he longed for a hot bath. Though he intended to see Joy first, as once she knew he was in the Rock, he'd not get a moment's peace until he did so. Arriving at the family floor, he stepped out and wondered where she'd be, looking around for some servant to ask. He saw his sister walking quickly towards him. "And not a moment too soon," she said to him as she arrived. "What's going on, sister? Have you not heard of your nephew's folly?" "What's Tyrion done now?" he said with a chuckle. "Not Tyrion, Jaime. He's only gone and gotten married," Jaina said, her voice full of frustration. Talk about being caught by surprise. He couldn't even begin to think what his face looked like. But he could tell he was standing there open-mouthed. "Jaime married? Wait. What was the problem? Isn't that what Jenna wanted?" "That's a good thing." "No." "Aye, it is. Though the damn fool has done it in front of a tree. We'll need to throw him a proper wedding. Invite everyone who's important," she said, shaking her head. "Trey?" he asked, focusing on the one thing that made no sense to him. "Did you even read my ravens?" she said, looking at him angrily. "I've been busy, you know," he said defensively. "By the 7, give me patience." Yadia has married Lady Daisy Mormon in a ceremony in front of the old gods of those damn northerners at Winterfell, of all places. Now he wished he had paid more attention to those ravens. Yai marrying a northern lady. Oh, this would no doubt be doing the rounds of the 7 kingdoms very soon, and it would send shockwaves through certain quarters. Gods know how Cersei would react. Oh, to be a fly on that wall, though perhaps not even the walls may not be safe from his niece's fury. As he was trying to deal with this, he heard the little voice, and whatever hope his sister had of getting him to speak to her was lost. "Papa," Joy said, running to him. "Hello, princess. How is my favorite girl today?" "I'm good, Papa. How long you stay?" "A little while. Where's Beliar?" he said, looking for the demon cat. "Balin saw a mouse, Papa, so he ran after it," she said, and Jirion both chuckled and thanked the gods. That cat was a menace. "Come on, princess. Let's eat, and you can tell me all about your lessons." "No lessons are no fun. Me and Balon have fun stories, Papa," she said, giggling.
"Balon and I, Joy,"
Jaina said, looking at her. "Really, Auntie, what you and Balon do?" his daughter asked curiously, and Jenna just sighed as she walked away. "Never mind, Auntie Genna. Why don't you tell me you stories, princess?" he said, lifting her in his arms. Joy spent the rest of the day informing him of the things she and the cat got up to. How she could make terrorizing servants seem like normal everyday fun made him laugh, especially since he knew there was no malice in it. It wasn't that she set out to terrorize the girls, it was simply they made the mistake of annoying the demon cat, and well, as Joy put it, Balmine Papa, they no touch. They ate, and he put her to bed. Reading her a story, he found himself a bad substitute for Jon. Though thankfully she had stopped asking when he was coming back, which wouldn't be for another moon or two anyway. The poor boy would never be allowed leave again. He knew, given how she behaved when he himself left. He hoped that both he and young Loras were doing well. He had received one letter from Jon a couple of moons ago, and he looked forward to seeing them both again. Apparently the next time that would be was for a wedding, so, forsaken the bath he still longed for, He instead walked to his nephew's solar to speak to him and his sister, knowing she'd come along as soon as he arrived. Knocking on the door, he entered to see Tyrion busy with paperwork, and so he poured himself a glass of wine and took a seat. "Uncle, how fares you?" "Good, Tyrion. Though I hate these trips." "I can imagine. Look, before Aunt Jenna arrives, I wish to speak to you on something important." "Very well. I've received a report that someone intends to steal one of the gold shipments." "Reports? From who?" "A man named Ellie that Jaime put me in touch with in King's Landing." "You trust this man?" I do. That's not all, Uncle. It's the who's planning it that will shock you." "Who?" "Rhaegar Clegane." Tyrion began to explain why he thought it was Clegane, and how they could deal with it. Between them, they came up with a plan, though he wasn't sure about it and felt it far too risky, but Tyrion assured him of it, and so he let it go. Before they could discuss it anymore, his sister arrived. Still not happy based on her expression, she sat down, and they talked about Jaime's marriage and what it meant for the West. As he finally soaked in his bath later that night, he couldn't help but laugh. Jaime had surprised them all. He had assumed his nephew would never marry, but he had evidently fallen for the woman of his dreams. Tyrion smiled in happiness for his nephew, before he felt his mood darken as he thought about the one he himself had lost. She should be here, Joy, should know her mother. He threw a glass against the wall as he felt his anger rise. Damn fucking Tullies. Tark 2093 AC. Brienne. She had arrived back from the tourney almost 2 weeks ago, and she was bored, but more than that, she felt a little betrayed. After losing the fight with Jon Snow, he had spoken to her and discussed her future plans, not that she really had any, but he had brought up the possibility of her squiring at Casterly Rock. There are many fine knights there, Brienne, and given your talent, you could only learn from them. No knight would take a lady to squire Jon. I beg to differ, but even if not, I'm sure Lord Yakad could take you on. Should we not find a suitable knight? Doesn't he already have both you and Lord Lors? It does, but, well, who says what squire's duties are? Brienne, isn't it more the lessons themselves that are important? It is Jon, but do you really think I could? I do. Just imagine what it would be like, learning from a swordsman like that. So she had returned and she had imagined, and every day she had felt her excitement build. To learn from Jaime Lannister, to train with Jon and Loras daily. She had considered them both friends, only to find they were not. As each day went by, she waited for a letter to arrive, an offer, and each day she had been disappointed. Still, she trained every day and tried not to let it get her down too much. She should have known that just like any of the other boys she had met, Jon and Loras were never going to be her friends. At dinner that night, the conversation with her father was stilted. She was still feeling upset, though she was trying to hide it well. Just before they finished, one of the servants arrived and spoke to her father. They cleared away the dinner things, and her father asked her to accompany him to meet some guests who'd arrived. Making their way to her father's solar, she wondered who had come at such an hour. Once they entered, they took their seats, and a few moments later, a man was shown in. "My lord, my lady, forgive me for the lateness of the hour. My ship was delayed due to bad weather, and the letter I carry was conveyed to me to be most urgent," the man said, handing her father a letter. "Who sent the letter?" "I do not know, my lord. I was just asked to deliver it, if you'll forgive me. I'd like to catch the tide." "Of course," her father said, and the man left. She looked on as her father opened the letter before he smiled and handed it to her. "Lord Selwyn, my squire Jon Snow spoke fondly of your daughter and her skills with a sword. He has recommended to me, and I take his recommendation seriously, that with the proper training, there is no limit to the level she could reach. Given my own propensity for marital activities and my squire's recommendation, I would like to offer Lady Brienne the opportunity to train under myself or a worthy knight. I understand, my lord, that this is a strange offer, so I suggest that she joins us as my ward. Her safety, well-being, virtue, and good health, all guaranteed by myself and my house. I give you my solemn vow, my lord, that she shall be treated with the respect and courtesy due her standing, and that I'll have no man of any rank treat her discourteously. As I'm presently on my way to the north, I only ask that should you accept that you hold her travel or your own until my return, I expect to be back within 6 or more moons, and a letter should arrive upon or close to then. Should you wish to come see where I would have Lady Brienne stay, and should you have any further question of me or my squire, I looked forward to seeing you in Casterly Rock. Lord Jaime Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, Lord Paramount of the Westerlands, Warden of the West. Looking at the letter, she couldn't believe it. Had she been alone then, she knew the tears would have fallen from her eyes. Instead, she kept them at bay. He had told her the truth. He hadn't lied or led her on. Everything he said to her in person, he had said to his lord too. They considered her skilled, talented enough to be trained by Jaime Lannister. She looked to her father and awaited his response. Even with the offer, she worried he would turn it down, despite his reputation as a swordsman. She knew how he was thought of, and she worried her father would have no wish for his daughter to be trained by the Kingslayer. "My dear, I do not know what to make of this. Father, I appreciate the offer, and I've no doubt of the truth of the words, but would it be shameful to be trained thus by this man?" he said, looking at her. "It may not be Lord Jaime, Father. It could be a knight, but even so, I've seen Jon Snow, Father. He's Lord Stark's natural son. Surely if Eddard Stark has no problem with his son being Lord Jaime's squire, then we cannot turn our noses at the same offer." "Ah, you have the right of it, daughter. Is this what you wish?" "It is, Father." "Then so be it. I have not denied you anything up until now. I'll not start with something you want. Though I am coming with you, I'll see for myself before I leave my daughter alone in the West, even with guards." "Thank you, Father," she said happily. A few moons later, when the letter arrived, she was excited. Not only would they be going to the Rock to meet Lord Jaime, but now they'd been invited to a wedding, one which she knew they'd not have been invited to without the offer from Lord Jaime. Simply put, they were far too lesser a house to be invited to the wedding of the Lord of the West. Though she cared not for such festivities, she still looked forward to them, not just for the spectacle and feasting that would happen, but because it was finally time. She packed her chest with all her important belongings, her armor, her clothing, even her prettiest dress for the wedding itself, and waited for the servants to take them down to the ship. They would sail to King's Landing, where they would be taking one of those large Lannister ships onto Lannisport, and then they would ride to Casterly Rock. Over the last few nights, she'd looked at the map her father had to see the route, memorizing it in her head. "My lady, we're ready to go," the servant said, and she got up to leave. Taking one last look around her room, she wondered when she returned. She felt a little sadness, though it was tempered. The thoughts of seeing the West excited her, of seeing Lannisport and Casterly Rock. She looked forward to learning from Lord Jaime, from Loras, from Jon Snow. She looked forward to spending time with her friends. King's Landing 2094 AC. Cersei. She was sitting in her rooms when the news came, a servant running in to hand her the note. She was in such a good mood, too, until she read the thing. A mistake. A jape. Surely this was someone trying to have fun at her expense. Well, they'd find out soon enough what happens when you mess with the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. So she stormed from her room. Sir Borstein following in her wake. Down the corridors she went and into the king's quarters, where she found him sitting there half drunk as usual. Sitting in front of him, rambling on like the old fool he was. Jon Arryn must have seen the displeasure on her face as he rose. Where his little shadow was, who knows? Though she was glad she didn't have to look at the smug master of coin. Why Jon Arryn was here, she knew not, but she held her emotions in check. Smiled and then handed her husband the note. He took it, briefly focused, laughed, and handed it to Jon Arryn, who at least had the sense to look perturbed by what it said. So the Kingslayer found himself a she-bear to warm his nights, Robert said, swallowing some wine. "You can't mean to allow this," she said angrily. "Allow what?" her oaf of a husband said bemusedly. "A Lord Paramount marrying a savage," she said, almost losing her composure. "He can marry who he damn well pleases. I'm not his father," Robert said before laughing even louder. "Oh, I can imagine what the old lion's face would have looked like had he still been with us." He laughed more and refilled his cup. "And you?" she said, looking to Jon Arryn. "My queen? Have you nothing to say on this? A heathen northerner marrying into the richest house in Westeros?" She looked at the look in the Falcon's eyes and could see he was on the verge of saying something, but her oaf husband interfered. "What would Jon have to say? Your brother is a man grown. He's free to marry who he pleases. Now leave us. I'll hear no more on this nonsense." She stormed from the room and back to her own. The vase was first, followed by the water jug, and then she began on the linens of the bed. The tears fell from her eyes, and for how long she raged she couldn't tell. When she was done, she fell against the bed, crying more and more. He was supposed to be hers. He was her other half. It was they who should be married. A lioness, not a bear, was what her brother truly needed. When she woke, it was already late. The darkness had fallen, and she had been left alone ever since she came back to her rooms. She called for a servant and asked for wine. Where her bottle had gone from earlier, she wasn't sure. Had she drunk it? Had they taken it away? No, they wouldn't dare. When the wine came, she sat in her chair while the servants changed the torn linen and removed the broken glass and pottery. Had she looked around the room, she'd have seen how they looked at her, pity or fear on most of their faces, but she was too lost in her mind to even notice. After they had done and left, she took the wine and walked to her bed. Laying down on it, she pictured his handsome face, his firm body, and felt herself grow excited. Before she had a chance to do anything about it, though, the image came to her, her other half kissing another nameless, faceless woman, Jaime laughing as he danced with someone who was not her, she cried as she drifted off to sleep. "My queen, can I get you anything?" She heard a voice call, and she looked to see one of her servants, a small, dark-haired girl whose name she couldn't remember. "No, I'm fine." "Why are you here?" she asked, looking at the girl. "My queen, you called for me to help you dress," the girl said, looking at her in confusion. "Oh, that's right," she said, allowing the girl to dress her. She left the room and found Sir Horp as her guard, which was strange as she was sure when she'd fallen asleep it was Sir Barristan. Making her way down the corridor, she heard Myrcella speaking to Tommen and stopped when she heard them speak of her name. Day, she was confused. Her name Day was moons away. Deciding to go in and see her sweet girl, she opened the door to see her two children sitting on the floor playing with a brown and white cat. She shook her head. Wasn't Tommen's cat brown? "My loves, how are you today?" "Fine, Mother. We're looking forward to the celebration," her daughter said, smiling. "Celebration? For your name Day, Mother." "Oh, that's a long way away, sweetling," she said, a smile on her face. How thoughtful of her children for thinking of her. "Mother, it's tonight," Myrcella said, looking at her oddly. "No, that was wrong. It was moons away." Her little girl was mistaken, wasn't she? She found she didn't know, couldn't quite be sure. She turned to Sir Richard, who didn't look as if this was wrong, as if this was news to him. Could it be her who was mistaken? She smiled and said her goodbyes to her children and went off to seek Pixel. While she hated dealing with the old fool, he was loyal to her and her alone now. Her father was gone. Halfway to his rooms, she stopped. She was a queen. Why was she going to him? She turned and walked back to her room, sending a servant to fetch the maester. As she entered her rooms, she looked around. The colors seemed off. Were they always this yellow? Didn't she used to have red walls? Her paintings, her tapestries, where were they? There were no lions on the walls, no images of Casterly Rock. Instead, Storm's End was depicted and stags were present everywhere. Black and yellow instead of crimson and gold. This wasn't right. She'd get to the bottom of this soon enough. "My queen? It's good to see you looking better," Pixel said as he entered. Better? What did he mean, she wondered. "Yes, my queen. You look far more like your old self than you have in over a moon." "Master, it's most strange. I find myself questioning when my name day celebrations are," she said shakily. "My queen, they are tonight. His Grace has been planning them for the past moon." "He has?" she said, surprised. "Indeed, your Grace." She dismissed the man and walked to the bed, looking around for anything to make sense of things. Something had happened, something had changed, and she couldn't even begin to imagine what it was. She searched her vanity and found her small chest and opened it. The two notes were there. They had been crumpled and then straightened, and she looked at them both. The first took her breath away, while the second sent her into a tailspin. One announcing the betrothal of Jaime and some Mormont girl, the second announcing they had been married in the north, and would be marrying again at Casterly Rock. This couldn't be right. Jaime wouldn't do this to her. Not her. He loved her. She felt the room spin. Her head was dizzy and she fell unconscious to the bed. The dreams came quick and fast. She was a young girl practicing swords with her twin. They were running around the vaults in the rock, hiding from each while laughing at their fun. She was slightly older, and she held her brother in her arms, his face inches from her own. As their lips met, she felt his fingers touch her, and her breath quicken as they made love for the first time. Felt her heart break as he rode off from the rock. She saw him throw her out naked from his room, her cries not making any difference. Then she was at a tourney and he was jousting, his golden armor shimmering in the light. She watched him unseat opponent after opponent, each bringing him closer to his inevitable victory. He rode over and placed the garland on his lance. Her heart raced as she looked at him. Ride towards her. She looked on in stunned silence as he passed her and moved to a little blonde girl. Who was she? Why was Jaime moving to her? Wait, surely not. He couldn't. It was supposed to be her. He frowned. Not some girl. She looked at the girl, saw her blonde hair and green eyes. She looked like her, like Myrcella was she. She couldn't be. Could she? The images flashed before her eyes. He was kissing a girl, someone not her. He was smiling. A septon was reading. This was a wedding. No, no, no. She saw him, saw the woman, the little girl, being crowned. The images swirled over and over. He was smiling at someone else, holding someone else, marrying someone else. She saw the girl with her blonde hair, her green eyes. Saw her smile as she held the flowers. Her flowers. She woke up crying and began to pound her fists on the bed. It was supposed to be me. She was supposed to be our daughter, she screamed. Casterly Rock 2094 AC. Jensen. When the Raven arrived, she had barely been able to believe it. The fact he was getting married was one thing. That he was marrying a northern lady, another. She knew there would be issues with some of the lords who had hoped for a match, but she found she didn't care. Her nephew, who had shown no sign of marrying, was doing so. He would continue their line, which was very important. They needed the future of their house to be secure. She had frowned when she had read about the northern wedding, but at least he was also marrying in the light of the Seven. She had sent out the invites even to the king and queen despite Tyrion and Gyrion's reluctance. While she doubted they'd show, to not invite them would cause problems, as she knew her niece would see it as a snub. And while she'd rather not have that fat oaf in her home, he was the king. So she had prepared, ordered the finest wines from the arbor, had the best bards and minstrels employed for the wedding feast. She had considered attorney, dismissed it, and then when Kevin brought it up, had decided to have one anyway. It wouldn't be huge, but large enough to make it worthwhile. She had ordered the best fabrics for her boys and for her brothers and nephew, and now she and Joy were being measured for not only their dresses for the wedding itself, but for whole new wardrobe. Ouch, she heard her niece say. Are you all right, Joy? Lady did an ouch, auntie, the little girl said, scrunching her nose. Well, we'll be done soon, my love. When is the party, auntie? One more moon, sweetling. Too long, Joy said, shaking her head. Jon will be back for the party, Joy. He may have a present for you. Oh, the girl said softly. She shook her head. The girl had missed Jon terribly at first. Then over time it had become something which annoyed her. Where once she'd get excited when she heard his name, and wonder when they'd return. Lately, it had become indifference, which was far better than the anger she had gone through a couple of moons ago. Jenna had no doubt once she actually saw the boy back, it would quickly change, but he had hurt her by being away for so long. All done? The woman said, and Joy smiled when a girl came in holding some sweets for her. Her own measurements and fitting took far less time, while she had put on weight over the years she had stayed. How she was for a very long time, and her clothes barely even needed to be measured for her. But still, she wanted to look her best, and so she had come rather than just order them. Besides, there was no way Joy would have allowed herself to be fitted without her. Even with her, it had been difficult to get her to leave the damn cat at the Rock, but in the end she had done it reluctantly. Once they were done with the fittings, they and their guards left the seamstress to head over to Kevin's before journeying back to the Rock. She had not been in Lannisport for a while, and had especially been keeping away since Oberyn and his brood had arrived. Up until now, at least, they'd been well behaved, but the Viper's reputation far preceded him, and so she was on her guard. Kevin's residence was a hive of activity as usual. Her brother had taken to being Lord of Lannisport like he'd been born to it, and she felt so proud of his accomplishments. The city thrived. The fleet was almost as large as the one they'd lost 5 years earlier, and with the addition of those monstrous pinnacle ships, soon it'd be Lannisters who ruled the waves. Joy ran off to Martin and Willem as soon as she saw them, her hair flying loose as Gaina laughed at the loss of yet another ribbon. The ones she got from Jon and Loras were the only ones she'd not throw away. After sending the guards to make sure her niece and nephews were well protected, she went in search of her brother, finding him and Lancel going over paperwork in his solar. Aunt Jenna, Lancel said politely when she entered. Nephew, she nodded. Lancel, why don't you go and get some refreshments for me and your aunt? Kevin said, and her nephew nodded before running off. How have you been, sister? Good, busy though. This damn wedding. Well, at least he's married, Kevin said, laughing, knowing how much trouble she had trying to find him and Tyrion a bride. Will they be here on time? She asked. They will. I've sent the Lion's Roar to meet them. The Tyrells? Aye. Sent the Lion's Mane. Any word from our niece? She asked, and he shook his head. Probably for the best. Aye. How are the Dornish behaving? Well, the brothel is busy, he said, chuckling. It's true then. Every night, how he does it. I have no idea. Any idea why they've come? Jaina asked. Tyrion hadn't been able to ascertain any more other than they wished to speak with Jaime. No, but we're watching, and they've been mostly well behaved. They spoke for a few more minutes before Lancel returned with some food, which she ate. The food from Kevin's kitchen's far better than the fare from any of the taverns. Once finished and after stopping off to say hello to Dorna, she left in search of her niece, finding her and her nephews playing some odd game. Calling Joy to her, she bid her nephews goodbye, and after the carriage was ready, they set off for the rock. The journey itself took little time, and she was glad it was still light when they arrived. They took the lift to the family wing, and as soon as they arrived, he was there waiting for them, almost as if he knew they were coming. She looked at him, his beady yellow eyes staring back at her. He'd been better lately, had stopped scratching her at least. Though the servants were still wary, which was more than could be said for her niece. "Bowen, I'm back. Missed you," Joy said, hugging the cat. "Joy, we'll be having dinner soon. Perhaps we should leave Balerion where he is." "No, Auntie, Bowen hungry. He'll be good." "Won't you, Bowen? Now come, we go play first," Joy said, running down the hall. Jenna shrugged. There was nothing for it. It just wasn't worth the fight. She once again cursed Jon Snow for finding that damn cat. Turning away, she walked towards her rooms, hoping Aemon was elsewhere. She'd much prefer to deal with the demon cat than her stupid husband. Highgarden 29-4 AC. Marguerite. Eating lunch in the garden with her grandmother. She found herself increasingly bored. Her days since she'd come back from King's Landing had devolved into the same old routine. She missed the adventures she had while there, the sense of good she felt she had done. Here it was, papers and organizing things that others would do. When she had been there, she was able to see the effects of their work, see the people benefit, while she knew they were still benefiting. It was hard to think of it when you looked at words on parchment. She had tried to do more here in Highgarden, but the truth was, even the poor here were in a far better shape than those anywhere else. People didn't go hungry here. They didn't lack for a warm place to sleep. While there were orphans and she spent time with them, they were far better cared for than those in Flay Bottom. And so she felt she was just spinning her wheels and doing little. She also hadn't heard from Jon or Lorz in ever so long. She knew they'd been traveling and that getting letters would be hard, but she had hoped they'd write more, that Jon would write more. "Are you feeling well, sweetling?" her grandmother asked. "I am, grandmother, just bored," her grandmother said, and she giggled. "Yes." When the servant came in carrying a note, she watched intently as her grandmother read it. She waited and waited to see what was in it, to see if she'd be made privy to its contents. It took some time before her grandmother said anything, and when she did, Marguerite felt the excitement begin to build. "It seems we may have found a cure for our boredom, my dear." "Grandmother, we're going on a little journey." "Where to?" she asked excitedly. "Lannisport. It seems we're going to a wedding, Marjorie." The next few days were hectic. She had needed to ensure that she had her best clothes with her, which then, at her father's insistence, meant some new ones. She also wished to purchase her presents, though she decided she would wait until they got to Old Town, when she saw the lack of options. It was though the idea of the wedding itself was that had made the days pass so quickly. She had barely paid any attention to the news that Jaime Lannister was betrothed. It had come on a day where she had been feeling unwell, and so she had somehow not added it up in her head. A betrothal meant a wedding. A wedding of the Lord Paramount of the West was a huge affair. Her family would need to be there. It had all just passed her by until the letter arrived with the invite. A wedding at Casterly Rock would be a glorious thing to attend. Her aunt's wedding in Old Town was, and the Lannisters would no doubt try to outdo it. But it was the thoughts of seeing her brother again, of seeing Jon again, which really raised her interest. It had been many moons since she saw them, and she had expected it to be many more, but now it was less than one. "Come, Marjorie. We'll be late," her mother said as the last of her chests were loaded. "I'm ready, Mama." "This is so exciting, is it not, to think they're sending one of those large ships to meet us in Old Town?" her mother said. "I know." Grandmother is most pleased. "Well, we know she's not the most pleasant traveler," her mother giggled. "Mother," she said in mock outrage, before she giggled too. Eventually everything was loaded, and they got into the carriage to take them to the boat. They'd travel by ship rather than across land, having the time it would take to get to Old Town. The river ship was far more comfortable, and they could carry more luxuries, or essentials, as he grandmother had said. For Marguerite, it was the newness of everything. She had been barely a babe the last time she'd traveled along the Mander, so she found herself keen to enjoy every moment of it, even going so far as to look out the windows of the carriage to her grandmother's annoyance. "Close those covers, child. Or are you trying to give me a chill?" her grandmother said, not long after they had set off. "She's just excited, Olenna," she heard her mother say. In the end, though, she closed the covers, as her grandmother had asked, and sat back to enjoy the ride. It didn't take them long to arrive at the ship, and despite her father trying to organize things badly, the captain kept them on schedule, and they sailed when they were supposed to. She stood on the deck looking on as the ship carved its way downstream, enjoying the wind as it softly blew through her hair, and only when it started to get dark did she head below. They would spend a few days in Old Town before the Lannister ship arrived, and would be in Lannisport within 2 weeks. After eating her meal and walking accidentally in on her brother and his betrothed being far too friendly with each other, she went to her cabin to sleep. Laying down in her bed, she began to picture the wedding, picture everyone dancing to the music. Closing her eyes, she saw Grey Ones looking back at her, and she imagined herself dancing too. Lannisport 29-4 AC. The Red Viper. Removing himself from the bed on the ship was hard. Removing himself from Aelia far harder. She slept naked, and as he looked down on her body, he almost gave in to the urge to wake her once again. Instead, he quietly dressed and walked to the deck. Obara was leaning against the mast, looking on with a bored expression as Cirella pointed out stars. Nam was standing in the corner speaking to one of the guards while Tyene was nowhere to be seen. If we could just learn to read them, we'd be able to sail anywhere, Cirella said, pointing to one of the formations. We can already sail where we wish. Obara said, her voice full of disinterest. We cannot sail west, daughter. Oberyn smirked at Cirella as he made his presence known. We could, though, Cirella said, and he smiled at her, ever curious if anyone could find the way, it'd be her. I wish to speak to you all, Naim. Come here. Where's Taiyang? With Daemon. Ubara said, her face scrunching up in disgust. Cirella, find your sister. It took a few moments, and when she arrived on deck with Daemon, both were still fixing their clothing. He flashed a look of warning at his former squire before laughing. Dismissing the men from the deck, he turned to speak to his children, bidding Daemon to stay too. We're heading into the lion's den, and we must be careful, behave well. Give them no reason to suspect anything is amiss. Why, father? They are Lannisters, Neem said, shaking her head. They are, and their time will come, but I seek a larger foe, one I've waited a lifetime for. Will it be slow, father? Chani asked, her voice full of glee. You will suffer greatly, see what you can find on the other one, but discreetly, my children. I can allow him to walk this earth a little longer, but the mountain falls soon. For Aelia, for Rhaenys, for Aegon, the girls said together. Unbowed, unbent, unbroken, Oberyn said, and they nodded. He walked away but called Daemon to follow. As he headed down back to Eliar, he turned to his former squire and hit him a clip on the ear, smiling as he did so. When I said watch my daughters, that wasn't what I meant, he said, laughing. I tried, my prince, Daemon said as he laughed too. Keep an eye on them when we arrive, Daemon. Albar especially. We can't be asked to leave. Of course, my prince. He left him there and went back into his room. Undressing, he heard Elaria moan, Come back to bed, my love. He turned to look at her laying on her side, her legs slightly parted, and he was lost. He was but a man, he thought as he climbed on top of her. They arrived the next day, and all thoughts of slowly dressing and leaving later were ended when Daemon knocked to tell him they had a welcome party. One which included a Lannister. He sighed before dressing, and as he and Elaria walked to the deck to look down, he spotted one of the Lannister brothers, Kevin. He thought along with the imp himself. Walking down the gangplank, his daughters behind him, and Daemon with a hand on his sword, Oberyn reached his arm around and pulled Elaria tightly to him. Look, my love, Lord Jaime must value us, for he sent his own brother Impt to greet us. Noticing the small grimace on the other Lannister's face, he smirked, though the dwarf kept his features steady. I do prefer Tyrion, Prince Oberyn, the dwarf said, and he smiled at him. May I present mine own paramour, Elaria Sand? He looked, waiting for the disapproval, but was surprised by the imp's greeting. Lady Elaria, I bid you welcome to Lannisport. The imp said, and Oberyn could see the smile on his face was genuine. I thank you for the welcome, Lord Tyrion. We've organized accommodations suiting your station, Prince Oberyn, if you'd care to follow. He had intended to find the most luxurious brothel and take up residence there, but he was curious at what the Lannisters would consider suitable, so he nodded and followed. They walked down the street to where a carriage and horses awaited. He, along with Elaria, Tyene, and Cirella, took to the carriage with Tyrion, while the rest of his party took the offered horses. What brings you to Lannisport, Prince Oberyn? Tyrion asked, and he smiled at the fact he'd come out with it right away. I wish to speak to your brother on matters involving trade. Perhaps I can help. Do you speak for your brother, Lord Tyrion? He said, raising his eyebrow. Do you speak for yours? Tyrion said, and he laughed loudly at the dwarf. On this I do, not on much else. It took them not very long to reach the house they'd been given. He was surprised by just how luxurious it was. Not that the Lannisters didn't have the gold for such a thing, but that they were offering it to him. He looked around it as he walked with Alleria, and she too seemed pleased, especially at the rather large sunken bath where she winked at him when she saw it. I thank you, my lord. This will do fine. Of course, Prince Oberyn, should you wish to attend, we would like to throw you a fitting welcome at Casterly Rock, the day after tomorrow, perhaps. I would like to see the rock once again. It's been many a year since I set foot there. You visited the rock, Tyrion said inquisitively. Not long after you were born, myself and my sister arrived. I wished to see the monster they spoke of, but alas, I found only a boy, a rather small boy, though not everywhere. Oberyn said, and Tyrion laughed. Well, what I lack for in height, you make up in other areas. Illyria said, and Oberyn laughed with her. Indeed, as for entertainment, I'd recommend seeing Alice at the Yellow Dawn. Tell her you're my guest, and I'm sure she'll find something to keep you occupied. Tyrion said, and he nodded. For now, I shall take my leave. It's good to see you here, Prince Oberyn. Lady Illyria, truly, what a strange little man. Illyria said after Tyrion left. Far friendlier than I expected. Oberyn looked at her. Shall we try this Yellow Dawn, my love? I prefer to try this bath, she said, dropping her dress from her shoulders. A few days later, it was almost a week later when they received their visitor, and Oberyn almost choked on his wine as he looked at a face from the past. Sir Richard Lonmouth looked well, healthy, and for a dead man, that was quite a feat. How he'd managed to get past his guards he'd worry about later, for he had nothing to fear from Richard, though perhaps the man could answer questions which had been on his mind ever since the letter and had arrived in Sunspear. Sir Richard, I had heard you were dead. I thought I was dead too, until I found out it was just that I was in the Crownlands, Richard said, laughing. Ah, as witty as ever. What brings you back from the dead, Richard? Call it justice, call it vengeance, call it whatever you wish, but I'm here because some crimes need to be paid for, and paid for in blood. Oberyn moved from his chair and stood up. So it was him. This was the man who sent the letter. He looked at Richard and saw the truth of it in his eyes. Why now? I'm in a position to help, so shall we speak about how we're going to take down the mountain? We should, but he's mine, Richard. No one else's. He's mine. For Elia, Richard said with a nod. For Elia, he said in reply. Lane is port 29-4 AC. Richard Lonmouth. He had heard word from one of his spies of a Dornishman arriving on a northern ship, and it had raised his interest. Had Oberyn sent someone on ahead? Was this Dorne's work? He needed to investigate. As he walked into the room, he was so glad he'd done so himself. How Arthur had survived would no doubt be a tale all on its own. But he was here now, in the flesh, and if he was here for what he hoped, his king suddenly had gotten much safer. I heard you died, old friend, he said, taking a seat. You too, Arthur said, looking at him. No, just wanted to. I know how that feels. What brings you here, Arthur? I should ask you the same question, Richard. Arthur said, looking at him. I'm here on the king's business, the true king, he quickly added when he saw the brief anger on Arthur's face. You've met him. I have, Arthur. You're looking at Jaxier's Targaryen's Master of Whisperers, Richard said, and Arthur laughed. At least he knows loyal. He does, Arthur. Are you here for what I hope? He asked, looking at the famed knight. I came to see him, to see for myself. I need to know if he's Rhaegar or Aerys. He's his father's son, Arthur. On that there's no doubt, Richard said, and he saw the smile on Arthur's face. What is he like, Richard? Smart, honest, loyal. He's a good lad. Arthur. He'll be a great man, and an even better king. You heard of the trade deals, right? I heard. They were his ideas. He's improved the North already. No doubt, given time, he'll do the same to the rest of the realm. What about the Lannisters? As far as I know, they're behind him fully. Jaime is anyway the Kingslayer. Arthur said, a note of disgust in his voice. Careful, Arthur. I don't know what happened with Jaime Lannister, but I know the king won't have anyone speak badly of him. Should you do it? Should you force him to choose, he won't choose you. You know this how. He told me he considers Jaime his most loyal supporter, and I believe him. You do? I do. I've checked Arthur. He treats him like his son. The king returns it too, sees Jaime as his father almost. Given everything, I think he's changed. Arthur just nodded. Whether or not he'd convinced him, he'd find out later, but he hoped he had. Having Arthur with the king gave them even more legitimacy. but more than that, he was the best protector he could have. He has Barristan on side too, Arthur. He does? He asked, surprised. Yes, that's who brought me in and pointed me in the right direction. When will they be back, Richard? Another moon, I think. Not really sure. You heard about Jaime's wedding, right? What? Married a girl from the north. They'll be having another wedding when they return. So that's why Oberyn is coming. No, not exactly. He proceeded to tell him of his plans for Oberyn and the Mountain of how they'd get their justice for Aia. He told him of Varys and why he'd needed to kill him and of his role in things. When he was finished, Arthur told him his own tale, and it was as wondrous as he imagined Red Priest's secret trips to find artifacts, the prince that was promised. He smiled as he remembered Rhaegar speak of the prophecy. He'd thought it long a thing of the past, and he intended to keep it as far away from the king as possible, but the artifacts interested him. Rocks, books, a mysterious chest, Valyrian steel. You find anything else, Arthur? Maybe a dragon or two, he said, laughing. I don't know. They show you things, Richard. Visions. Visions. Arthur told him of the vision he had. The lion protecting the wolf as it grew was obviously Jaime Lannister. The man in the white cloak was Arthur himself, being accepted by them both. The white wolf and the white dragon must be his king. As for the army and the flames, his quest for the throne, perhaps. You know he has a wolf, right? I heard a tame wolf who heard of such a thing. Arthur said with a chuckle. A direwolf, Arthur. A direwolf. You jest? No, for true, saw it myself. Larger than any wolf I've ever heard of, with white fur and red eyes. They spoke then of old times, of things past, and of their fallen prince. They drank without getting drunk, and Richard told Arthur to grab his things and took him back to his own residence. He would need to keep out of sight, and where better to hide than with a man who lived in the shadows. He sparred with him the next day, and was soundly defeated. Richard was no slouch with a blade, but Barristan or Jaime were the only ones capable of matching Arthur, and they too would fall. He had no doubt. He waited until a week after Oberyn arrived before he made contact with the prince. He set things in motion for their plan, and then suggested Oberyn stay to attend the wedding. He wasn't sure if the king would want to speak to the Viper, but better the chance be available before he left for Dorne. Once he'd spoken to Oberyn, he made his way to Casterly Rock. Arriving as a traitor from Essos, he sought and received a meeting with Tyrion. I wondered when you'd show up, Tyrion said as he sat down in front of him. Well, you knew I'd come. Besides, we have plans to make. We've a mountain to trap. And how are we going to do that? We're going to use a snake, Tyrion, a very dangerous one.